Order this meeting of the school committee on Monday, February 12th, 2024. And if you're able, please join us in standing for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
A reminder that this meeting is being recorded. Great, thank you. So we'll start with our consent agenda. There was 2 extra warrants, payroll warrants, in the meeting packet. There is also a citizens activity form for Dawn Brantley to join the town DEI committee as an alternate member. There is also an employee agreement between Westford School Committee and Westford Education Association Unit G. There is a special education reserve transfer and also an authorization for the superintendent to sign transportation contract extension. Any questions or comments on the consent agenda?
That's not an extension, that's the contract.
Okay.
It's not the extension.
So I'll amend my, I'll look for a motion to approve the consent agenda minus the word extension.
So moved.
Thank
Second.
you. Okay, and we're all in person for now? Okay.
Yeah,
Oh,
just in person.
Oh my God, that's a touch screen. Sorry. Sorry, but I think that's Mari. Okay, all in favor? Bill?
Aye.
Sean? Chris?
Aye.
Catherine?
Aye.
And I'm an aye. And we think we have Mari joining remotely, so let's just check. Sorry, I didn't know you had a touch screen. So fancy.
Very high tech.
All right. Well, I'll take that vote as 6-0,
There you go.
and then I'll start the public comment.
No, 5-0?
Yep, thank you. Next up is our public comment.
Better.
It's a reminder that public comment for any item or topic on or off the agenda is always available near the top of the agenda for individuals to share their thoughts. Speakers will be limited to 2 minutes per person. Please use public comment even if you refer to something later on the agenda. Virtual public comment is available through Zoom. Raise your hand and you'll be promoted to panelist and unmuted, or in person up at the microphone in the conference room B. So we'll give that a minute to see if anyone.
We don't have any.
No hands yet?
No hands.
Okay. Great. Okay, we will move right on to informational updates.
Thank you. Last meeting, we shared and celebrated the number of students at the middle school level who were accepted into the Eastern Districts, the Music Educators Eastern Districts Conference. We didn't have the information at that time, so I apologize for not sharing this, but we also had 4 ninth graders because the junior districts is actually for grades 7 through 9, so freshmen are able to participate. So we had 4 freshmen as well who are going to be participating in the junior districts festival that we had talked about earlier. So we just wanted to congratulate them and again thank the staff, the teachers for everything that they've done to prepare them for it.
Thank you. Congratulations.
2 weeks ago, the Rotary Club of Westford continued a long-standing tradition of handing out dictionaries to our 3rd graders, something that took a couple-year hiatus, but now that they're back in and they spent some time at day school Crisafulli in Abbott and shared a little bit about their service organization, as well as got the kids pretty excited about receiving a dictionary. So that was great to see. And after speaking with several 3rd grade teachers, I was pleasantly surprised to hear that the dictionaries have made a comeback in the classroom as part of our EL curriculum. So some of the teachers shared that information with the Rotary, and they're going to try to make an effort to get the dictionaries to next year's 3rd graders at the beginning of the year so that they'll be able to use that. So it's exciting. So thank you.
School committee updates?
I just want to acknowledge what was a rich and fulfilling 2024 Lunar New Year celebration at WA, hosted by the Asian Culture Club and the Chelmsford Chinese Language School. It was the first, bringing my family on Saturday night, and it won't be the last. It was just terrific, well done, and really a treasure to have in this community, so very well attended.
Town DEI met at the end of January, and just kind of fleshing out the multicultural calendar again and seeing what is being added there. The other things they're working currently on now is celebrating Pride Month and Juneteenth recognition in Westford. So there's some working groups kind of being formed within them to see how they can go ahead and support that. Acton, I believe, do a really big Pride kind of festival and celebration, and so I believe the Westford group are kind of in talks with Acton to maybe kind of co-share that celebration. And yeah, that was kind of it for Town DEI.
Policy Subcommittee met last week, continuing looking at a number of policies around library materials, classroom materials. We just want to make sure those policies are as up to date, and we talked about that. A lot of those haven't been updated in a while. Make sure they're solid, and let our excellent educational staff have plenty of room to make good decisions about what should be in the libraries and in the classrooms. We have, Jenny got us some information about student activity accounts, which we just passed that policy a few years ago, but it looks like we need to do some updates, or could benefit from some updates there. So we'll be diving into that one as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I just wanted to thank the folks, I want to thank Jeff Goodwin for taking us to Robinson and Abbott today and taking a look at some of the things going on in those two schools. I thought that was helpful and informative. Okay, what else? School time subcommittee, we'll talk in a little bit. And then, the other thing, I had a conversation with town moderator Angela Harkness, and I know, Dr. Chu, you're in the loop on this, and Principal Toomey,
He just stepped up.
who was just in the room, is in the loop on this. But I know she's got ideas around at town meeting about how do we feed people at lunch. And I know she's got concerns about at 12 o'clock or whatever time, potentially 1,000 people all of a sudden leaving that parking lot and then trying to get out and come back. And she's hoping that there can be a way to bring food in. And so I know she's got ideas. I wanted to put the call out there if there are any groups. To me, when she told me this, the model that popped in my head was the WA Holiday Bazaar, where you do have different groups providing food and in a fundraiser fashion. So that's my hope, is that maybe different groups at WA see that as an opportunity to feed people, but also maybe as a fundraiser kind of a model, because I think it's one of these things that we had the town meeting. Remind me the title of the group for
Access to town meeting.
Access to town meeting.
Yeah.
And I think this is the kind of thing we got to look to do to make sure we get the best participation that we can and support people who are coming out for that. So if anyone has any ideas, I would say reach out to Angela Harkness or Principal Toomey.
Thanks.
I don't know, Sean, if you have the CPAC update, or there's
No, please, go
Yeah.
ahead.
Sorry, just so people know that the 15th, which is Thursday, there is the Navigating the College Search for Those Who Learn Differently being presented. It's a virtual presentation with Landmark College. And I believe we have a date as well for towards the end of February for a kind of a CPAC meeting.
That's the
The Budget Roadshow, and there'll be a meeting.
Yeah, it's that
20th.
Thursday. Is that the 27th or 29th?
Something like
29th.
that. 29th.
29th.
But again, that presentation on Thursday, I think, could be very helpful.
Okay, thank you. And then, obviously, if you're watching this meeting, you probably already got at least one phone call or text message or email with some.
I forgot about that
with
already.
some musical
I know.
background.
Yeah.
Accompaniment.
Tried to have a nice little Sarah Bareilles playing piano.
But the number one question I get is, when's the new last day of school? So I wanted to say it is Monday, June 17th, which is an early release day.
Correct.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep, and I think there was a notification on the town side that trash and recycling is proactively delayed for tomorrow. Okay, great. And students. Sorry.
So,
Thanks, Alex.
at WA, the Student Council is running their annual Secret Admirer Day fundraiser where students can buy little candies or chocolates or things and send them to other people in the spirit of Valentine's Day. And also this Thursday, February 15th, Dr. Chu and some other people will be coming to WA to talk about the budget, and from 2 to 3, any students will be able to come to the PAC and ask some questions after a presentation. So this will keep the students more informed about the budget,
Yep.
because that'll be affecting them.
Yep. Looking forward to it. What time is the late bus?
3.
3. Okay, so we've got to talk fast.
That's right. She looks at me.
Okay, great. First item of business is the MCMAC bylaw update. So we'll welcome Director of Land Use Management, Jeff Morissette, and any guests, please introduce yourselves, and we'll queue up the presentation that you sent over.
Thank you very much. Jeff Morissette, Director of Land Use Management. With me tonight is Joe Genowitz, our town planner. Also in attendance in the audience is Select Board Member John Cunningham, who's the chair of the MCMAC, the advisory committee. And of course, as you know, Chris Sanders is a member of that committee as well. So first of all, I want to thank you folks for giving us this opportunity to provide a high-level overview to the school committee and school leadership. We just want to make more people aware of the MBTA community's requirement and the proposal that's being brought forward to the March 23rd town meeting. And then if you have any questions, we're happy to try to answer any questions you folks might have at the end of that. So first we wanted to kind of go into what is the law, what is actually being required here. And Westford is one of 177 MBTA communities that must have a zoning district in place. We must have our district in place by the end of this calendar year that allows for multifamily housing as of right. And that means that the permitting authority, in this case, it would be the planning board, they don't have the discretion to say no. So it's something that would come in, it would be as of right. And then specifically, what does this requirement mean for Westford? It means that we must have a district of reasonable size. It means that we must create the potential for 924 dwelling units. So we must create the minimum potential for 924 dwelling units, but there's no requirement that any of those units actually be built. So that's a very important distinction. And then secondly, the way that number is estimated, it's based on a very non-Westford specific formula that they're applying to all 177 different communities. So it doesn't factor in different circumstances for each community. Like we may have some different setback requirements, we may have different open space requirements. One of the most important considerations is that Westford does not have municipal sewer system. So when you look at Westford as compared to a lot of other communities, we're going to need a lot more land space in order to have the same number of units. So while the estimated unit capacity that they call it, the potential number of dwelling units, it may seem a high number, we will tell you that is not a realistic number in any sense. And we can go into that more later in detail if you folks would like. So we mentioned we must create the minimum potential of 924 dwelling units, and it must allow for 15 units per acre for density. That sounds like a scary number. It's something very different from what you may have seen in town, and even some of the highest density developments that exist in town right now, we estimate they're no more than 10 units per acre. And that's based on some of the site constraints, limitations, and as we mentioned, the need for sewer systems. The areas in this district, they must be feasible to actually develop. You may have heard some stories about other communities where they may be sort of handpicking other locations that it may not be practical to develop. You can't take things that may be subject to wetland resource areas or cemeteries or things with conservation restrictions. They must be practical to develop. And we believe we've done that in this case. It must allow for families with children. So while we can't have anything like, say, age restrictions, we can certainly allow for age-restricted housing, but we cannot require it. So the goal of this mandate is to have more units and to allow for families with children to live there. It doesn't mean that's what you have to end up with, but your zoning bylaw must allow for that. And so as we go further on, you'll see that we're trying to actually encourage more than just one kind of dwelling unit. We're trying to incentivize and encourage some smaller spaces that might be suitable for folks trying to age in place. We're trying to encourage the production of smaller dwelling units that might have less tax burden going forward. We're trying to think about opportunities for people just starting out, starter families, or young folks who graduated from college that may not have a place to come to in town unless mom and dad open up their house once again to them. So we've put together with a lot of great work. We mentioned there's an advisory committee. It's called MCMAC. It's the MBTA Communities Multifamily Housing Advisory Committee. And we try to get a wide variety of folks to participate in this, such as Chris. We think we have a good range of perspectives. They brought a lot of different points to the table for consideration. They had a lot of robust dialogue, and I think as they worked through that process since July, it really helped shape the proposal that's coming before town meeting. And I think we ended up with a much better product than if we had not gone through that process. So one of the things we're trying to do is we recognize it's a mandate. Nobody likes being told what they have to do, but we're trying to use this as an opportunity to try to address some of those other challenges that exist for our community. So we do need more housing. There is a housing crisis. We do need more kinds of housing, and we need more housing with less tax burden, as we mentioned. But we also have other issues that we're trying to address with this. As you may know, we have a lot of commercial office space. And even before COVID hit, we had a significant vacancy rate in our commercial office space. And that did not get better with COVID, and as these leases come up, there's going to be more and more vacancies. So strategically picking some of those office spaces, adding it to the draft overlay district, we think that's giving an opportunity for those properties as time goes by, as market changes, to try to react to some of those vacant office spaces. We think that's just good for the community, good for business, and better for the tax base. We're also trying to help out. There have been some industries disproportionately affected by the pandemic as well. So some of the hotel industries, they have not gone back to where they had been. They're facing different challenges. And so there's at least one hotel that's included in this. If something happens with, say, that one hotel, that can help the remaining two hotels. So we're trying to look at those other types of advantages that could happen. We desperately need some new growth, as you're all aware, as we're entering this budget crisis. We're not just looking to have more construction, we're trying to have quality new growth that can add to the tax base and not just push the problems down the road, but actually be tax beneficial. We're also looking at opportunities to promote positive redevelopment for some properties that are either underutilized or undervalued right now. And we're trying to strengthen the existing commercial tax base. When you partner this up with the Commercial Recreation Overlay District that town meeting supported, it wasn't that long ago actually, it feels like ages ago, but was that just last
year? Yeah.
Right. So a multifamily component to that Commercial Recreation Overlay District, that can put a lot of built-in customer base to really help commercial recreation thrive there. We're also looking at ways to include more public amenities and trail systems and connectivity to really help. We don't want to just have housing. We want to have housing with some amenities. We want to get the best project that we can in each of those locations. And the MCMAC has been great about really pushing the envelope and trying to see what is perhaps the best opportunity for the town. They looked at this. This is one of the challenges they faced is, do they want to go about this an approach to just check the smallest box to satisfy the mandate? In the end, they said no. They really wanted to look at a proposal that would provide the best good for the town, for the community in the long term. And so the draft district, I'll tell you, was at least double the size that it is now. And they went through an iterative process. They did some pros and cons. They got a lot of public input. As you'll see in the packet, we won't go through all that, but there's been a number of opportunities to outreach. We've had a lot of surveys. We've had the strategic planning retreats. We had the public workshop. And then we just invited people to participate in that conversation. And through all of that, it's been whittled down what is now before you that we'll see in the packet. And we think the draft district that is before you folks tonight, it does provide a good, healthy range of some short-term opportunities for redevelopment, some medium, and some long-term or may never happen. And We think that's good mix, because we don't want to have necessarily a lot of growth all at once, that it could have a bigger impact on the school system. And we want to be able to have the town react appropriately and keep pace with whatever the change in demand is for services. So we do think the proposal that is there is a very good balanced approach. And we can happy to share that with you later. We also are trying to promote some redevelopment of just some existing parking areas. It's literally pavement sitting there unused, and it has been for a very long time. So we think that's a missed opportunity. And then, like I said, we're trying to incentivize a number of opportunities here. We're trying to promote some sustainabilities, as I mentioned, public amenities, accessible trails, trails that are accessible to the public. We're trying to encourage commercial components. So we would love it to not be only multifamily buildings. We don't want to have just apartment buildings. It'd be great to have amenities that can service the people living there or near there. We want those walkable opportunities. We think by including non-residential components, that builds a healthier tax base, and it can cut down on the need for, vehicular traffic. And we're definitely trying to encourage some age-restricted housing. We can't require it, but we can certainly try to incentivize it. And we do suggest imposing an affordability requirement for 10% of the units, but we're also keeping options open for the permit granting authority to leverage that for other amenities or features that at that time the board thinks is good for the community. One of those is actually workforce housing. So it is a certain level of affordability, but it doesn't qualify for the, quote, affordable housing, which is 80% of the area median income. A lot of the people that took our surveys, and thank you very much, there were hundreds of them, most of the people that took those surveys, they actually would not qualify for affordable housing. But they might qualify for the workforce housing, between 80% and 120% of the area median income. So those are some of the things that we're trying to work into this. We're trying to get the best deal as we can for the town. We're not trying to just do the minimum to satisfy the mandate. We're trying to keep a lot of options and give the permit granting authority a lot of discretion to, on a case-by-case basis, either grant relief, grant waivers, or even through special permits, get some of those projects and features that they feel the community really needs and could benefit from in the long term, rather than just doing the minimum and getting some added housing units. We think we can do better for Westford, and that's what we tried to do with a lot of help from the planning board, the public, and especially the MCMAC committee. So, we've gathered a lot of information in the packet about some of the existing multifamily developments in town. Gives you some information. We looked at some of just the conventional subdivisions. We've looked at some of the apartment buildings. The Bell Apartments is some of probably the most current examples for you folks to look at. And what we found, which is not surprising, there's a few trends that show up. We know that single-family houses tend to result in the most school-aged children. We know that home ownership tends to result in more school-aged children as compared to rental properties. And so when you look at all of that information, you'll see that some of the apartment buildings tend to have maybe you need 4 units to get 1 school-aged children. At least that's the most current trend. But you may say, okay, but what if they do the townhouses that has a higher impact on the children? Well, what we would say is those townhouses are less dense development than the apartment buildings, and even if you look at the ratios, or at least the current math, you're still probably not going to end up with the same impact as the large apartment buildings that only have 0.25 per dwelling unit on average. And again, this is a relatively small sample set, but we tried to at least show you. We had a lot of help, by the way, from the school department. Thank you folks very much. Very timely turnaround on that information. So we just wanted to get the information out there. We recognize it's not an exhaustive sample set, but we wanted to show you some of the trends that we're seeing in the most recent multifamily developments and what that might have translated into in terms of school-aged children. We do know that looking at the trends, as you folks have pointed out, and as the Budget Task Force Committee pointed out, there has been a downward trend in school enrollment. It does appear that it has leveled off, though. So certainly with a proposal like this, it obviously could result in the addition of school-aged children. It's certainly possible. But when we look at the unit potential, and that would, to us, there is a lot of existing capacity within your school system. We obviously don't know, do you have everything that you need to still handle if the enrollment came back up to what its high level was? That's a different question, that's beyond our scope. But what we will tell you is the unit capacity numbers are very high, they are not practical, and it also assumes that you have essentially the highest level of development on every one of those properties, and it's only multifamily housing. So it is very, very conservative and very unlikely. So conservative in the sense that you would not get near those number of units, and you would not get near the school-age children that you would think. And we're happy to dig deeper on that if you folks would like, but we don't want to overstay our welcome on that. Maybe we could go to the actual draft district area, if you can.
The, one of the stuff, this one?
Yeah, that'd be great. So as you can see, the blue area is currently the draft overlay district. And so when we talk about an overlay district, what does that mean? Well, you folks, you've probably all been to town meeting. You know probably that an overlay district sits on top of one or more underlying zoning districts. And in this case, it would allow for some other uses not otherwise allowed, and there would be different regulations or standards in place that would govern that. So in this case, it would allow for the multifamily housing, just like the commercial rec that overlay district would allow. It does not take away any of the existing development rights that the current property owners have under current zoning. We thought that was very important to us. If, however, they want to take advantage of the option to do multifamily housing, then they would have to abide by all the regulations that would be part of this new proposal. So, but that's their choice. If they opt in, they got to play by the rules. If they don't take advantage of it, no harm, no foul. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And so as you'll see, if we go from sort of, sure. So we have a portion of the Neshoba Valley ski area. And earlier on, we actually,
I was just saying, this has a little bit of history
Yeah.
to it. As Jeff mentioned, some of the unit capacity math that the committee struggled with. So the model that the state uses, if you put in all of Neshoba's property, it's around 190 acres. So the model spits out 2,800 units can go over here. But it doesn't factor in any of the existing wetlands on there, the hill of Neshoba, and the steep slope that would hinder development over there. So it's really just an unrealistic number. It makes compliance somewhat easy, but we want to look at what's actually realistic and what's best for the town.
and we also don't want to undermine, town meeting supported, enhancing commercial recreation there. This is intended to be a component that would help that. So we don't want to cover all of Neshoba in a multifamily housing overlay district when we want commercial recreation to thrive there. So that was the other reason for scaling it back, is to not take away from what town meeting already put in place.
In terms of short-term growth, this is one that would probably be a short-term potential permitting project here. The owners of Neshoba have been in communication with developer Norbum Company. They, on our town website, they've made public a number of concept plans that they have for the area. They specifically picked 40 acres over here because they're looking at a maximum of 600 units over here, over a multi-phase development. So in the short term, you could see approximately 300 units over there. And so they've made that all public, but they do want to pay respect to the commercial rec overlay that was done there last year, and they want to maintain that and have that as an amenity for any future residents over here.
Because they do want more year-round commercial recreation. That's one of the, besides climate, is maintaining employees year-round versus seasonally. That's actually a challenge for them. So this could help with that as well. What about you?
Tech Park West, this was pretty favorably reviewed throughout the planning process by the committee, by the public during the strategic planning retreat. It has a number of vacant parking lots. One of those examples that Jeff mentioned earlier. A number of the property owners over here expressed interest in being located within the district. And it just provides a nice balance of some, again, short and longer term options, especially as some properties that are hung up in leases that are 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the line, they just want to be able to have options. They don't know what the market conditions are going to be at the time, but they expressed interest in being in there. That's been the whole kind of purpose of this, overlay process. We want to make it a positive experience and just provide people more options. If you want to take advantage of the overlay, as Jeff said, you play by the rules of the game of the multifamily development. If not, you don't have to. It just sticks with the underlying zoning.
And this area actually provides a lot of connectivity possibility. So we would love to find a way to actually, you have the existing Bell Apartments there already. There's opportunity for additional multifamily housing there. We think it's a missed opportunity if we don't try to promote some connectivity between those existing and potential future dwelling units and the Neshoba Valley ski area, particularly if they have some housing there and they really enhance that commercial recreation. There are some opportunities through the end of Robbins Road to potentially connect, and we just think that'd be a great thing to do for people to walk or bike there without all having to get into a car. So,
Yeah. It'd be nice to be able to walk there and walk all the way over to Kimball's, get your ice cream, and walk it back off.
at least half the ice cream off, right?
At least
So, Tech Park East.
Tech Park East, another one that was looked at favorably. Again, this was one that the, I think, committee struggled. They liked having, a larger portion of the park in, just because there's one ownership and it can kind of be master planned. But playing around with those unit capacity numbers, they wanted to look at, what maybe in the medium term made sense for the property owner over here. One of the buildings throughout their complex has a lease expiring within 2 years. And it's right adjacent to an existing parking garage. So they said, there's potential we could take advantage of that and have some multifamily housing over here to support other businesses here in the park. They would be able to attract, employees that want to be able to live closer to where they work. So that's how that what was a larger area kind of got narrowed down to the collection of parcels you see here. Again, a lot of vacant parking area, maybe 20 to 40% utilized. Same thing with some of the buildings over in that park. They might be 100% leased, but because of remote and hybrid work schedules, there are just many people there during the day.
And so as we mentioned, right now we estimate the unit capacity, which is that high number. That's not practical. It's probably about 5 times the number that's needed to satisfy the requirement. But again, we don't think that's a practical number, and that would assume, again, that every single piece of property in there gets developed, and it only gets developed as multifamily housing. So it's not realistic, but we think it does, and the committee believes, and the planning board believes, that it does provide a good balance for creating more opportunities for all those different things that we talked about. Just more housing needs, helping that commercial tax base, positive redevelopment opportunities, and if they limited it to the minimum area required, it wouldn't create nearly as much opportunity. So this is, I think the balance is this end result. They had a much larger district, and they're kind of just, factoring in the scary unit count number versus the potential good for the community. So that's sort of where we ended up with for now. And then what happens if we don't comply? We said what the deadline was. It's the end of this calendar year. So not much good happens if we don't comply. They keep getting a little more and more harsh as we go. First they started with, you won't be eligible for these grant opportunities. Then they expanded that list of the grants. Then they also said that, not only will you be subject to legal action, but if you don't comply, then we'll also start withholding monies for things that you're used to receiving monies for, such as for infrastructure and schools. We don't know what that means. They probably don't want to be specific, but we just want to mention that. But again, our approach has been, there is a mandate. It does provide us with an opportunity. We can try to address a number of existing challenges that face our community, and we get to try to do it with a simple majority vote at town meeting instead of the usual 2/3 majority vote needed for a zoning bylaw amendment. So we're taking the positive and trying to do some good for our community, and if there are some bad things that could happen if we don't meet the deadline, there are some positive things that could happen if we actually approach it, pass it sooner than some other communities. There are a lot of prospective developers that are looking at not just Westford, but other communities. The sooner that we can get a good bylaw amendment passed, there will be proposals happening. There will be projects happening. We'll get new growth sooner. We'll probably have a better chance at the better projects and the better developers if we are seen as a viable option sooner than some of the communities we may be competing with. So there is a positive thing to looking at this in March. The last thing we wanted to do was bring it to the last town meeting before the deadline, because we didn't think that's good for anyone. So we're happy. We have a lot more information in that packet, and we have way more information on the website. I believe we have some ways to get there for you there, but we didn't want to overload everyone or make everyone change channels if they're watching from home. So,
We lost anybody? Can we check? They're all still on.
and then we also, I don't know, John, if you want to add anything? So we're happy to try to take any questions you folks might have.
Great, thank you. I thought the packet was great, a great level of information for someone that knows it exists but hasn't obviously followed the meetings. You looked like you wanted to add
No,
something.
I was going to thank Jeff and Joe for their leadership on this, and John, and being on the advisory committee, coming in not, knowing very much about it, and feeling like, oh, this is a state mandate, and I think you've explained how you turn it something that's maybe imposed upon us into something that can be a real benefit for the town. And so throughout the process, I got more and more excited about the opportunities for Westford, for growth. I'm very visually influenced, so we saw renderings. I mean, not that you can promise or predict what's going to happen in Westford, but we saw plenty of renderings of how multifamily housing and mixed-use developments and things are looking in other places, and just really attractive benefits that I could see coming for the town. So I'm excited about that, and just really hoping that we get the support at town meeting. And honestly, I mean, if you think about it, also there's a reason that the state is doing this, right? There's a reason we need more affordable housing. So we're not an island. Westford's not an island. We have neighbor communities, and this helps out more than just maybe ourselves indirectly as well. And I think, it's MBTA communities because of rapid transit too, right, or mass transit. And so there's the environmental benefit too of putting housing where people can take mass transit, and that's fewer cars on the road. God knows in Westford we have plenty of cars on the road. We have plenty of miles of road to have cars on as well.
One of my questions was going to be, was there any consideration of in the law or in the requirement, or as you planned these, about current bus stops, like the LRTA?
So the LRTA, it was a consideration. So it's probably not a coincidence, though, that we looked at things such as where there was existing infrastructure to support multifamily development. We didn't want to go about proposing areas where it lacked, say, municipal water to support it. The LRTA bus stop, that was a consideration, because while we don't have MBTA services and
Right.
LRTA is not MBTA, it made sense in terms of, we know there are people in town that their work schedule revolves around the bus schedule.
Right.
You go to line in some of these stores and you hear the conversations, their shifts work around, that schedule. And so, and sometimes from economic development perspectives, when we have conversations with some of the business owners, it's getting their workers there.
Yeah.
Some of them depend on public transportation. And so some of those areas are there, not just because we have the infrastructure, but because it makes a lot of sense. And the LRTA is one of those reasons that we looked at that. We also looked at highway access, where they have the capacity for the traffic. Help me out here, Joe. We had a whole list here.
Where existing multifamily is located, we
Oh,
looked
right.
at that as well.
Walkable opportunities.
Yeah.
So that was a big thing for us in our surveys. We had a lot of folks who particularly took our 55 plus survey. They want amenities on site. They want to be able to walk to amenities. And so some of these locations were chosen simply because there are existing walkable opportunities right now, or if there aren't, there likely would be, throughout the course, of the next reasonable number of years. We also looked at, the planned widening of Littleton Road and where there's going to be sidewalks So, you know, it was a lot of things. We also tried to include, as you mentioned, some of those underutilized properties or some industries that may be suffering, maybe a couple properties that some people might think could do with some positive redevelopment, but it might not be economically viable to do so right now under current zoning. So we're trying to look at a lot of things, including trying to put some customers nearby, some business areas that might be struggling. So it was kind of, you know, a lot of different things that went into this. And then, you know, it was a lengthy process with the advisory committee and the planning board and public input. And there were a lot of properties that came out because of the surveys and the feedback we got. Like, no, we don't like that, or it doesn't make sense to us right now. We're like, you know, we don't want to have that battle. We want to try to.
Whole Foods had to be protected.
Yeah. Of course, Whole Foods would not be the first thing to go, but, you know, you just, it's off the table right now.
Thank
So
you.
we have something on the books.
Thank you. Any other questions from?
I just want to make a comment. I think it's worth noting as well for people who are unfamiliar with this, and Jeff has already presented at the Commission on Disabilities, so we've had a good discussion on this, is that this is literally only to approve for zoning. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen.
Yep.
And if any developer does come in, they will then have to follow our typical process through the planning board and everything. So just for anybody watching to understand that this is only to have the opportunity to potentially develop. Doesn't mean it's going to be a free-for-all if we pass it.
I had a question. You mentioned the 55-plus crowd and the response there. Also thinking about the other side, right? The school crowd, which we exist in, and noticing a lot of those districts that overlay along the 110 sector. You know, just pulling up the elementary district map, and dawns on me that a lot of that area is in the Robinson-Crucifulli region. Was there any discussion or conversation about potential units going all in on that district right now and what that impact would have for those two schools, or other impacts around the district, and, you know, potential redistricting plans? Just thinking about, you know, enrollment right now, and if we're plateauing, but we're, you know, down the road forecasting more students. Just
Yes, so
about it.
a very bright member of your committee, who is on the advisory committee, raised a lot of good questions about why weren't other areas considered, why might it not, why weren't you looking at other areas to maybe balance this? And there are a couple of reasons why certain other parts of town were not looked at. Either it lacked municipal water, or there were other issues raised by prior town meetings about the need for a corridor study, and there's already friction between commercial and residential in certain areas.
Nitrogen sensitivity in some areas.
Yep, some sensitivity there, but it was raised, and honestly, I do think that's a valid consideration. I actually don't believe, if you were to look at the number of enrolled students that this could translate to, I don't think it's going to be the number that's going to be as big a consideration. I don't think you're going to get the total number that you might be thinking, but it's that it might be placing more of them in that area. And what does that mean in terms of either districting or school transportation? So I think that might be something that you may have to think about. And it's not going to be that you're going to have 750 more students. You know, you might have, maybe you'll have 250 long-term, but maybe they're in a different area that you weren't, you know, necessarily planning for. So we don't have those answers. We were kind of, we also benefited from our consultants' outside review, just looking at things such as the lots, the consideration, the location, where you had the transportation, where you had the infrastructure, where you had synergy with other businesses, where you had the walkable opportunities. And as it turns out, it did line up very well with what the planning board, the planning staff, and even the MCMAC committee laid out for those options. There are other parts of town that we can certainly look at, but they don't necessarily lend themselves to that kind of development without doing additional infrastructure improvements. Which doesn't mean it can't happen, it just, that was not, we were looking for honest development in the here and now without a major barrier.
Thank you.
One of the things which comes out pretty surprisingly, at the end, is the development, right? It's like, originally the projection is to have 200 plus students, but it never materialized. It ended up more like, I don't know the real number. Do you guys know the real number?
Yeah, it's 99.
Okay, yeah. So so it really depends on like the composition of who occupy all those apartments or units.
Yep. And there's nothing to say a different development might not be, you can't overlook at, a handful of existing multifamily. If something is more appealing for some reason that, we can't quantify right now, it could result in a higher number. It could also result in a lower number of school-age children. We just don't know. We're just trying to share some of the trends for some of the projects that you folks might be able to relate to.
And it's something, we'll definitely have to keep it, once this passes at town meeting on March 23rd, we'll just have to keep that in mind as we look at our current building usage and we look at the MSBA project about where would future,
Right.
districting and or schools sit, Because we do have a good center of mass of students below 495 and no schools down there, so it's something
Yep.
that we'll have to keep in mind.
Anything else? No?
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you. This
Okay.
is great.
Wow, we gotta come here more often. This is like... Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
You guys.
If anyone has questions that you can't think of right now, you can always email us. We're happy to answer via email or come back. And if you feel so inclined, if the committee wants to take a position as we get closer to town meeting, when you're more informed, we're happy to reach out again if you're willing. So,
Okay.
thank you very much for your
Thank
time.
you.
Thank you.
What's that?
What's next? School start time subcommittee
Start time
update.
Subcommittee update. Let's do it.
So we're gonna transition to Chair McDonald
Yes.
for a status of the subcommittee work to date.
Status, and I'm going to open it up to the entire subcommittee and also partner Chris Sanders, who
Feckers. So why don't you
Such
guys
a good job
identify
of-
yourselves? 'Cause
Okay.
Not everybody tracks
Yeah.
our multiple
This will be a
subcommittees.
multi-
Bill and I have been
Yeah.
looking at this since October, November, and felt like this was an opportune time to give an update to the committee, because we've kind of reached a point where we think, thanks guys, some wider discussion would maybe be good, and just let everybody know where we're at. And so, if it's okay with
Yep.
Bill and Catherine, I can kind of talk through some of what's in the slides. So we didn't want to belabor this too much because we think it's pretty well established the positive impacts that are known for later school start times. And this is something that's been looked at and understood pretty widely, both in this district and elsewhere. And so, but on this slide, we hit some of the main points. How much sleep teens need each night. We know from challenge success surveys, it's been a number of years now, so maybe they're a little stale, but I'm guessing the numbers haven't gotten any better in the past 5 years, that our high schoolers are getting closer to 6.5 hours of sleep. I think it was about the average, somewhere around there, compared to the 8.5 to 9.25 that science says they need. And by the way, each of these links is a hyperlink to like either an article or a journal article about these things. Any number of health and achievement and quality of life impacts for later start times. And then a common argument that we hear, and we often hear it from students. We'll talk to the high schoolers and be like, "What do you guys want later start times?" And they'll be like, "No, we'll just stay up later." But the science actually says, "No, you won't. That you will get extra sleep, even with as little of as a 25-minute delay in start times. You will get more sleep." And so I think that's key that we understand that.
The other science piece that if it's linked in there is the idea that, yes, their natural rhythms are keeping them later.
Exactly.
Like, we know that. So like the idea of they'll just stay up later.
Right.
It's about the quality of sleep, and it's about sleep in the morning.
Yeah.
Because
Right.
we do know that trying to make kids go to bed early or teenagers go to bed early, it actually doesn't fit with
Exactly.
their rhythm.
Exactly. And so this is just showing where we stand. So in the spirit of DART plus adjacent districts, we did DART plus adjacent plus DCL, our athletics
program.
conference. And so that's what this list here, and it's sorted by start time. And so you can see we're shaded in gray. We're, in the top third on early start times. And then I just put a box around those middle ones because that's the median and the mean there, right in the middle of what you'd see with these districts that we compare ourselves to in any number of ways. And so a lot of these, and I don't remember offhand how many of these are recent changes, but a number of these have changed in the past, say, 8 years. And so I think if you saw this 8 years ago, we'd be much more in the middle. And so there is that trend, both locally and nationally, to go later. And so, again, the 8 o'clock is sort of maybe a sweet spot. And then we've talked to Principal Toomey and Jeff Bunyan, our athletic director, about impacts to sports. And I know in the past we've heard that because, look at the last 4 on the list are all conference teams, they're getting out at 3 o'clock, 3:45. We're getting out at 1:55. So there is a discrepancy there that can impact people's time and waiting around. But we also understand that, going too late can have impacts to athletics as well, as far as facilities that we use and our coaches who are giving their time, after school and things like that. So, that leads us to the next slide where I thought it was, never mind, stick on this one, but I thought we were segueing to our criteria. Just wanted to at least mention that this isn't the first time we've looked at start times for our schools, and a lot of people know this. There was a citizen advisory committee 4 years ago and came to school committee with recommendations, proposals, and at that time we were amidst another it seemed tough at the time, nothing compared to this, but tough budget season, where there were still question marks around the transportation impacts, and so we didn't make a change at that time. Then 2 years later, there was a 4-tier busing proposal that would have enabled some later start times and potential lower transportation costs because of fewer buses, but we ultimately didn't go that path either. There was a desire to wait and see if we could do better and not go 4-tier, because it really does, if you think about it, it spreads out the day or the morning and then the afternoon, and so there's a big gap between the first students who have to get to school and the last, and so when you do that, you're really pushing the later students at the end of the day much later in the afternoon than we do now. We look at districts that can do a 2-tier busing, and that's great. I mean, if you had all those buses and you could do that, that's really nice because you don't have these limitations. And so, where's the others? Okay, that's fine. Yeah, that's the next one. I really don't know the order here. But it does,
Yeah, the next slide then.
Yeah, no,
Priorities
that's what
and
I'm thinking.
constraints,
But it
yeah.
does come down to transportation, as you can tell, in a lot of ways. That's the constraining feature. So we've gotten to work with Jen Piper, our transportation manager, and she's been great at helping us understand what the limitations are, how we do things now, what might be possible, what are the things we weren't aware of that we need to think about when we're looking at this. And so this is just setting the stage for where we're at now. And we kind of put in those bus gaps to have an understanding of, okay, what sorts of timing do we need to have from buses, from drop-off to picking up the next students and getting them home or to school in the morning. And we use this, in our meeting, we actually use this to play around and slide around like where start times could go.
Sucker for a good graphic, and I love it.
Okay. And it was functional. Like I said,
Yes,
we
yes.
slide it. And,
Yeah.
and so I think these are some of the things that we had in our heads as we really, for a couple of meetings, just wanted to think about what might be possible and what constraints we had and what we might want to try to do. And I think the goal was to get to 8 a.m. for our middle schools and our high school students, our adolescents. I think we wanted to, as much as possible, minimize impacts to the other schools. And so, not pushing our elementary schools too late, for example. If we just shift everything, they might be getting out pretty late. One thing that gets talked about is flipping the schedule, so have the elementary students go early, and then have our middle and high schoolers go later. But again, that's something that's a bigger impact. It's not to say we wouldn't or couldn't do it, but I think it's less appealing for a number of reasons. And I know, I think when we did that 4-tier proposal 3 years ago, it involved some flipping, and I think that, that raised some concerns for people. Again, not that we couldn't or wouldn't do it, but don't want to increase the number of buses. We're not trying to add buses and add costs. If anything, we'd like to reduce, and so that was a constraint we tried to stick to. One thing that came up in conversation was the possibility of combining students from different grade level schools on buses. And so what this looks like is the potential to have K-2 and 3-5 students riding together. The fact of the matter is that because we split our elementary students up into those 2 tiers and those 2 start times, those buses are going to neighborhoods and not getting completely filled up, bringing them back, and then going out to those same neighborhoods to get, the younger kids and so that's a flexibility that we thought would be helpful. And in a similar way, we had conversations about a similar flexibility about middle school and high school students. And so we know that that's something that would be new, and so that's something we would need to talk about as a committee, as an administration, as a district, and as a community, what thoughts people have about that. And so this is a notional, you'll notice the asterisk and the disclaimer at the bottom. I don't want to see the screen captured on Facebook with people freaking out. This is just something that we came up with. This has not been validated or, but it's one way that we thought could be possible. And what you're looking at there is bringing those K-2 and 3-5 start times closer together and doing just what we said, which is going to neighborhoods, picking up K-5 or pre-K-5, I guess, students in their neighborhoods, dropping off at one school, dropping off at another. So it would let us get to the 8 o'clock start time with as minimal of impact as possible to our elementary hours, especially, our K-2 is just shifted 5 minutes, correct? And then 25-minute shift for our 3-5. So this is a notional approach that potentially could get us to 8 o'clock start times, or the whole thing could be shifted. So if you decide 7:55 or 8:10, you just slide that. There are some questions with this. One of them is Robinson, Crisafulli, right next to each other, pretty convenient. Abbott and Nab, not too far apart from each other, pretty convenient. Have you done the Data Miller Drive? They're not that close together. So that's a question mark. We had lots of discussions around, well, maybe in that case there are some buses that do the immediate Miller area, some buses that do the immediate Day area, and then for the no man's land in between, then you do more of that combined thing. So we think through creative busing, something could probably work there, but we have not verified that, and we'll get to that in a moment. And then, so in conversation, we were reminded by Jen Piper that we do have a couple of buses. Principal Toomey, you can remind us who come early to Westford Academy and drop off 7-ish.
Yes.
Is that about right?
The early wave.
5 minutes or a few minutes before 7.
Okay, so before 7, we've got a handful of buses. Because of limitations in the number of buses we have and the number, you have all those high school and middle schoolers going at the same time, starting at the same time, just we hit a limit, and so we are right now dropping some kids off at WA a good 35 minutes before the start of school. And so as we're so pleased with ourselves for the previous slide and oh, we've got it, and we're like, wait, we still have students that won't be able to start at 8 o'clock or won't be able to get to school at 8 o'clock and benefit from that extra sleep. And we said we should really prioritize making sure this is equitable and finding a way to also make sure that everyone, that we can get everybody those later times, get that 25 minutes extra of sleep. And so what we're hoping is possible, and again, we haven't verified this, is, actually, can you just go back for one second? You see that 20-minute stagger between WA and middle schools. Again, this is entirely notional, but we're hoping that with some creative bus routing, most of the runs would be the same. You know, the buses are going out to the different neighborhoods. Half of them are going for the middle schools, half are going for WA and bringing students back. But that there would be a few buses that would be doing some short WA runs. So students who live a little bit closer, and so these are like 10, 15-minute runs, while the rest of the buses are doing their longer runs for both schools. And then once those buses have dropped off at WA, the students can go and do similarly some short middle school runs. And that if we divide things cleverly, that would allow us to cover everybody by adding that little bit of a gap. Again, huge caveat, we don't know if that's possible with 35 buses. We think it might be. And that led to what we feel like is a recommendation that we really look into bus routing software. You know, mostly our routes have been done pencil and paper by hand, and it's worked well for years because luckily year to year, we kind of know what works the prior year. Routes aren't changing a lot each year. You know, you might get an extra stop here and maybe that no more kids in that neighborhood at that school, and so there are little changes year to year. But that to really get some of the efficiencies that we think might be needed might take a little bit more computational power. And so we have spent some time in the past month or so looking at a number of different bus routing software packages and providers. We've been doing demos with them along with Jen Piper, just to get a feeling of what they can offer and what's out there. Now, we looked at it because we saw the need to optimize these routes to potentially do what we would like to do, but we also know that districts all over are using bus software for a number of different reasons. That's certainly one, but they do offer a lot of features, you know, parent apps and parent portals, so you can see, oh, if a bus is delayed or broken down, or you need to change what bus your child is going to ride on one day. There's all kinds of different ways that you can do that, that minimize the need, kind of back office need to handle those things. And so our recommendation would be that we look into bus routing software. I know it's a terrible time to add purchases, but specifically also a couple of the providers, and they're starred here, also provide services, consulting services, where they would basically do a feasibility study, a very small, targeted routing feasibility study. So we could take software and sit with it and try all the different routes, and it will optimize any given route, but when you're dealing with 35 buses, it does get a little unwieldy, and most of the software won't be able to just do all the routes. You know, you can't just say, here are my students, tell me the best way to do it. You need to at least start with the routes you have, and it might suggest, oh, you might do this. But that's where these professional consulting services would come in, would be to, they would spend time, they're experts at this is what they do, they know the software, they could spend more time iterating, massaging the routes, looking at our data, and making recommendations for what would be doable. And the hope would be twofold. One is that we can achieve these start times that we'd like to see, that try to hit that 8 o'clock minimum start time. But the other is, I think there's real potential for optimization and efficiencies in general, to the point where I think we would see fuel savings from route optimization. And a lot of the packages actually will quantify that for you. They're like, oh, after you did this, you saved this much in fuel. And I think there's also, while we can't promise this, I think there's the potential that, especially if we combine K to 2 and 3 to 5 busing, it's possible we could need one less bus. We just don't know, but that's the kind of thing, that's why you do this, is, you know, there are efficiencies to be had. So that's what we're recommending. We've talked to Dr. Chu in one of our meetings and appreciated that conversation. And I know we'll keep talking because I think at this point we need to figure out if it's feasible to do a feasibility study given current year funds. We're not talking about FY25, we're talking about this spring. Mm-hmm. And so we have to know that there are one-time funds available to do that. What we'd also like to do is, and on the next slide, we want to hear from community members who might be paying attention and might have thoughts about what they've heard tonight, or thoughts about what they've, what we've talked about in past efforts to look at this. And so it's not a full survey, it's actually just a single open entry text form that says, what are your thoughts about start times and busing? Because we just want people, I think what we learned last time, and Principal Toomey can remember this because he was on the Citizen Advisory Committee, is that when you ask people what time do you want school to start, everyone kind of wants around the same times. It's like 8 to 8:30 is really good for a lot of people. And then you saw like elementary skewed a little bit later, probably because that's what they were used to, and middle school and high school skewed a little bit earlier, probably that's what they were used to a little bit. And so I don't think we feel the need to do a full survey. I think we kind of know like what time people want school to start. It's really about what are the concerns they have. And this is the kind of information and feedback that we can also feed, if we do engage with consultants, we can feed to them as they look at our routing, and they can say, well, it sounds like you don't want to do this, so we didn't even consider that, that sort of thing. So we think if this were possible, we would engage with them, and within a couple of months, we would have results and a report and recommendations, potentially, that then there would be decisions that would be, the district would face at that point.
Mindful too that I think some of the startup and maybe recurring costs would also be offset by some of the efficiencies and optimization that can be found, so that it's kind of self-sustaining. And
Yeah, so thanks for doing this. We have been going through this a couple of times. I think this study correctly points out like the bottleneck or the constraint is on busing, right? So that's something which I already know. But like sometimes I think busing is a symptom, right? May not be the root cause. The root cause may be how our like schools are being configured or being structured, or we came back and forth regarding all those redistricting plans, all those stuff. That may be the root cause. So like, if I put my software engineer hat on, for a system with structured deficiencies, you can do optimization, but optimization can only buy you that much. So especially in a tight budget cycle, I'm a little bit uncomfortable like spending money where we don't know the outcome yet. That's one.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing really is like, if I put my software engineer hat on again, software vendors, a lot of time they do the so-called POCs, proof of concept, at low cost. So I would actually really encourage that if they can actually do some proof of concept, for example, between middle school and day school, how you can optimize that route, right, with no cost, because that's like, that happens most of the time for the POCs. It's like, we can engage the vendor and ask them to show us their software can work or can optimize that route for us without incurring costs before we actually like making a decision, because like do a consulting service or we're paying their money may not be like, they may want to actually do a free POC with us, because that's a very common practice in software in the industry. So I would encourage like to look or talk to them to say, hey, we have some sample routes, we have some sample school population. Can you actually help with us to prove your software could work before we actually have the full system go into your system, before we actually go select you as a vendor.
Right. I mean, the challenge there, because that's a good idea.
Yeah.
I think the challenge is to really do it, you need the full system though, because it's so integrated. I mean, at least for a given, if you wanted to look at the Miller Day, you at least need all the Miller and Day data in there. So I know that's part of it too, is them bringing in all of our data, all of our student data to be able to do that. But you're right, that's not the full entire district wide. So it's an interesting idea if that's possible. I don't know. I mean, they certainly didn't offer, but
Yeah, I would encourage you to talk to them to see if they can do a free POC, because like that it's not unheard of. It's very common in the software industry to do free POC to win the customer over.
Yeah.
Then like once the contract there, then you have like 5-10 year long-term contract, and that's where you make money.
Yeah, Sean.
Thanks for doing this. As someone who's been on the committee for years, I vividly remember the 2019 discussion and then 2021 discussion too. So this has been, I feel like this has been on the committee's radar for years, right? Okay, just if I could have some clarification. So a feasibility study would theoretically be a one-time cost, right?
Yes.
Okay, versus bus routing software, would that be a one-time cost too, or would that be
In most cases,
something
it'd be a recurring subscription.
recurring? Okay, and the benefit to that, right? I think you outlined some of them with the bus tracking and SIS integration and the like.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
And to be honest, and there's a range, we have quotes from those 4 companies, and there's a range, but the recurring is in the, I'm trying to,
One was 6 or 8.
5 to 10,000
Yeah.
annual costs.
Oh, wow.
If you did the recurring for the software. And they all have different add-ons, and so it really depends on what you're getting. It's not always apples to apples comparison between them, but that's sort of the order of magnitude that we're talking. There's also the potential for doing the feasibility part, the upfront, maybe doing a year of the software and then turning it off, right? Like if we're like, okay, we feel like we're good, like we can do that, we can use the software ourselves, well, not after that year, but we like our routes, we can tweak the routes, especially knowing that we may be doing a redistricting or something in 5-6 years, that at that point we would probably look at this all again. We don't think it's worth waiting for later start times to do that, but we wouldn't necessarily have to be recurring subscribers. But that's, again, the order of magnitude is 5 to 10K. And then for the feasibility, I think more like depended, but I think 7,500 to 18,000 for the feasibility. And that includes, did that include, I don't think that included some of the startup costs, because all the companies have the recurring software costs, but they all have first year, because there is a lot of setup. They're getting all your student data in. In some cases, they're working with your town GIS department to make sure, because that's a big issue, is like they want to know where is the house. Sometimes on mapping, map databases, you have an address, but really the number's off, and they want to know where are the houses, where are these students at, because they'll do things like when you want to route, you can assign certain students don't cross a street. We don't want these kids crossing the street, either individually or by grade level, like kindergartners don't cross streets. And so they will route left, right side pickups, so they'll reroute and things like that. But there's a lot of startup that first year, and some of the costs are for training and data integration and things like that.
To answer your question, Sean.
It does. Thank you.
I have a question about, so it sounds like you've been working with Jen.
Yeah.
And our in-house transportation director, and we just authorized the superintendent to sign transportation contract. Is there any conversations with Dee yet about what the recurring software ask would be? Like, is there anything on their side, or is it all on us? That's the.
I mean, maybe down the road, if there's efficiencies that can be born out of bus routes, we're looking at those potential.
We
we
have,
have
our
flexibility.
contract, we have control over the,
We have.
over the bus routes. And.
But even like the bus tracking, how do they do that?
That was a conversation
That's-
that would be something that you would have to be in agreement with the
Okay.
company for them to put.
Right.
the bike.
That's
Now,
not
they-
one-sided.
That's right,
Okay.
right.
And I will say, while all companies offer that to a certain extent, that was something we assumed we would not be
Oh, okay.
necessarily opting into, because D owns the buses, we'd have to work. I mean, it could be, but it's an added cost in most
There's
cases.
the difference, and that was something that it took me a minute to understand what they were talking about, the difference between being able to push out information, being able to have an app that would allow families to know that, oh, this bus is delayed,
Right, yeah.
versus people knowing where that bus is
Sure.
24/7.
Right, right, right.
And I think the point of this whole committee was, or looking at it, was really the bus routes, regardless of tracking and everything.
Right.
It's, what's the aim of it? It's to get the high school students at a later start
The
time.
end goal is the
That's the
later
end
start
goal.
time. A secondary concurrent goal is now this efficiency angle, which we all know is coming to the forefront, so.
The other thing I wanted to say was I appreciate the, however brief, but the slide at the beginning about the science, right? Because I know that as a committee, we have had this conversation, but we keep, like, there's like kind of a new wave of younger families that tune in and go, what do you mean? Like, you know, and it's a little bit different because we're not talking about a flip, at least tentatively. So I appreciate that. I think for someone to think of, you know, I went to school at 6 in the morning and I was fine. It's nice that we're to continue to include the science and the justification.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's on our SDIP. It's
Yep.
one of our approved school committee goals to flush this out, so,
And one thing we did keep in mind was potentially down the road of there being a K-5
Yeah.
redistricting. So, you know, we did have a conversation about flipping them around or moving them, but we kind of felt that the K-2 and 3-5 needed to stay together. in
There are
the-
variables at play here, right?
Yeah, there's
MSBA,
variables,
Project
yeah,
and Robinson,
exactly.
so some of these things also have to be,
So it's like, what can we do now? And then what gives us the flexibility for later when we have a better picture?
yeah.
Speaking of now, can you go back to the slide that had your timeline on it? Because we didn't really talk about that too much.
Yep.
I think that kind of be an important for people to understand, like, as you're still exploring it, what the potential timeline might be.
Right. And so you can see, we would hope to at least have some validation of the times that we've put up here, or at least have alternatives to know what's possible that we could present back to the committee in the next 2 months, basically 2.5 months. And we think that's, that'd be realistic. And then what happens from there, I think, really depends on what that shows, right? What we learn. And if changes are imminent, I don't know where the appetite would be to do it. If we can do a change in a reasonable way that's, minimizing impacts, we've had this conversation. I don't know if that's something that could be done by the fall, or if we're talking another year. I think it depends how minimal the impacts are, right? I think it depends how much the public feels like they've had a chance to digest this and think about this, and how feasible logistically
Yeah.
changing our bus routes are, and working with Dee on that. And there is a part of the process is validating what the software gives you. So it spits out, this is what you can do, and then you really want to be going and driving those routes with buses at representative times to say, yep, that matches up, that's feasible. And so that all would be in play in that April to May timeline of trying to figure out where are we at and what can be done. And I don't have any answers for.
yeah. And down the road, should it be the will of the district to push for later start times for, say, W8 middle school, having an appropriate amount of time to plan for that,
Yep.
for staff, for parents, for families, for students.
It
across the
kind of
board.
goes back down to what the impacts are. If
Yeah.
it's a shift,
Yeah,
then that might not have as drastic as an impact as when we were talking the flips.
exactly.
Right, that could have a bigger deal. And then, then just to assess that, because again, just to remind people, the committee has the authority to establish the times and just like the calendar, right? So that's one of the things that we'll have recommendations and we'll talk about it, but that's something that the school committee then is able to say, well, no, we want the school times to be X. Yeah.
That, for the software to accurately work, you really need the current registration information
Yeah.
for the bus,
Yeah.
right? And then that information wouldn't actually come until in the summer, because people register for the bus pass in the summer.
Right. We'd have to
So-
use,
so
we'd
that-
have to use our
There might
best
be-
data. We'd have to use our best
Yeah.
data that we have.
Some projections,
Yeah.
I mean, if we could achieve, if we can achieve it with this year's current data, you would assume we can achieve it with next year's bus ridership as well, because the numbers, I think we had the numbers from Jen that
They don't change
they
that
don't
drastically.
change dramatically, yeah. So we've had a few meetings with Jen
who's come in and literally gone through all of this, and based on how she does the rights and the numbers, she gave us all that data.
But
Yeah.
yeah, with a vendor, and then like if you do a POC with a vendor, normally the vendor want this actually to be available as soon as possible
Yeah.
for the next school year, right? Waiting for another year, so really doing a POC with them now probably doesn't make any sense.
It's not as
So
appealing.
if you are doing a POC, then really you are looking for September.
I have two last quick questions. One is, so there's no ask tonight.
I think asking for input and feedback, and then working with Dr. Chu on whether we think there are funds and we would want to proceed with
Yep.
something
Okay.
in the next few weeks.
And if other members of the committee have other thoughts that they think of, we can channel them to the chair.
Yes.
Yep.
And the one other thing I was thinking about as you were talking about, I went to that slide 3 with this one. What's interesting to me is if you filter just by DCL, we are the second earliest.
Yeah, we're pretty
Right.
early, yeah.
So the other ones are interesting, but like those are the schools we're playing.
Yeah.
And we're the second earliest.
Yep.
Wow.
I'm impressed Nathan aren't starting till 9.
Okay, great. Oh, have we checked if Mari had her hand
I was
up?
just thinking that.
Mari, no.
Mari could be asking questions, and we're not.
Well, I can see her, but I'm not seeing a hand.
Okay.
I'm listening.
Good.
No, I just wanted to make sure we weren't missing you. Thank you.
Very good tonight, Mari.
Okay, all right, thank you for the update, and we will look
We'll
forward
talk
to hearing
again
more.
soon.
Okay. So, we are moving on to the FY25 budget discussion, and we, geez, I mean, it's so hard to think about what's happened since our last meeting.
Right.
There was a finance committee here, meeting, so the town finance committee finished all of their department reviews. They had a meeting where they, had a list of suggestions on how to lower the FY25, how to lower the override amount. Two of those suggestions were directed towards the schools. $500,000 in reductions and $300,000 of additional offsets from our revolving funds and non-general funds. And so if that's a good enough segue.
Yep, so, if you go to the next.
Assumed this is where
Yeah,
you wanted
that
to
is where I wanted
start.
Thank you. So what I've done is we've looked at that roadmap, okay, and if you look at this slide, I know some people are probably not happy that we just keep adding new slides, but it's all staying in one spot. So I feel like it's
much
making
better.
sense. So if you look at the last meeting we had on the 29th, I had talked about that reduction of $355,000, okay? So then tonight, we're actually going to now be looking at a new information that will reduce the overall request by an additional $817,000. Okay, so that's taking the 500 reductions that the FinCom had a consensus around, and then and then offsetting $300,000. Now, granted, the numbers don't add up to those nice round numbers when we actually start talking about the things that we'll talk about. That's why I changed it. So you can go to the next slide. Thank you. So the first thing, what I talked about before is that it's a question of moving things from column B into this compromise area. And so we had talked about priorities in the last meeting. One of the things that I've heard very clearly is that there's been concerns about the number of people have been saying student-facing positions. Now, I want to say the administrators that are in that first line, they all do work with students, so it's not that they're not working with students, because they are. I just feel like that taking that scenario from B and now considering it here, that would again be eliminating our Director of Equity, Curriculum, and Instruction position, and we currently have one of our K-2 humanities position is currently vacant. And so this would be absorbing that position and then eliminating one of the elementary STEM positions. So we currently have a pre-K to 2 STEM position and a 3 to 5 STEM position. and we have the pre-K to 2 humanities position that is vacant, and we have a 3 to 5 humanities coordinator. So that would be absorbing that and then reducing one of those positions and having just one K to 5, pre-K to 5 STEM position and pre-K to 5 humanities positions. One of the things why I keep struggling with that is saying that because our curriculum coordinators have actually been doing a great job bringing the preschool program. They weren't originally under their umbrella because the preschool was a separate program, and as they've been moved into the schools over the last couple of years, the curriculum coordinators have been doing a great job working with the preschool as well too, with all of the standards. So I think that's just an important thing to note. So that is that's one of the pieces there. One of the things that we had talked about in the list of reductions from WA was the notion of one of the librarians. So WA currently has 2 library media specialists, and so this would be reducing them to 1, so they would still have 1 full-time library media specialist, but not 2. And then one of the reductions that was mentioned in the no override scenario was reducing 3 of the literacy specialists at the pre-K to 2 schools that currently have 6. So in this scenario, I am suggesting that we actually only reduce 1.5, and so that each of the pre-K to 2 schools would have 1.5 literacy specialists. How that would work out would honestly, depending on the interest in the way we schedule that, whether it would be one person split between 2 buildings and then a part-time person in another building, or what, it could work out in a couple of different ways. So those added up together would give us a reduction of $517,242. So now that's the new target reduction based on the information we got from the FinCom hearings. So that's in addition to the $355,000 that we had talked about at our last meeting. Okay, so next slide. One of the things that we were asked was if we could possibly increase the offsets from some of our revolving accounts. In the conversation, one of the questions that the FinCom asked us was about food service, and specifically our food service program we've always said that it's self-sustaining. The question was, well, are we paying, do the benefits come out of the food service revolving account? And it doesn't. So that was something that we immediately said, okay, we don't really talk about the benefits aspect typically, because that doesn't come out of our operating budget. That's part of the full picture with the town. So it's not listed here because it's not a savings that we will see out of our budget, but I know that the town is also looking to see, okay, if they were to offset the employees in food services who receive benefits, that would also come out of the food service revolving account. But we looked at how our custodians support the school lunch program. So when you look at the regulations that revolve around all these revolving accounts, it very clearly says that the food service amounts have to be spent on supporting the school lunch program. And they give you very specific examples as to how you can do that. So one of the things we looked at was that our head custodians, we know that in all of our buildings, they support the lunch program. They're actually cleaning between lunches. They're helping breaking down boxes from the custodian. They help after breakfast to serve. So what we did is we quantified what we thought the amount of time was that our head custodians were supporting that program. And it would be an exact amount once we figure it out for every single person's salary, because what we worked it out, and Jenny did a great job coming up with an equation similar to the way that she did that for the business office that you've already been aware of. So we're doing the exact same thing with the head custodians. And so it's approximately $150,000. The exact amount, I think, it depends on we'd have to look at each head custodian who's at a different step. And we'd want it to actually be a direct offset from their salary. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah. Okay. We previously already increased the integrated preschool revolving fund, the last meeting, $50,000. They had a suggestion, FinCom, that we increase it more. So we're looking to increase it another $50,000. And so what we're looking at is that we would use this to help offset the midday run that we have for our bus transportation for special education for our preschool students. It wouldn't cover the entire cost of that run, but it would help pay for some of it. Now, that would then increase the total offset in this account to $307,200. So one of the reasons why we wanted to put these total offsets here, the only one that's different is the food service, because we don't know what the town side would be, right? Because some of these we're now going above what we're expecting to pull in, and that's a conversation that we want to have as a committee that we're having with the subcommittee, the finance subcommittee, about establishing those policies as to what the cap should be, as to what we should be expecting. So in some of these cases, we're going above that. We haven't set those policies yet, though. I'm just bringing both of those things together here.
Yep.
So the other thing we looked at was increasing the offset from the music fee revolving offset, $15,000, which would make the total offset $150,000. We're currently using $135,000, and that's what we anticipate bringing in. So that would be increasing that, but we do have some additional funds there that we want to be able to use. We just don't want to create the offset to a point that we're creating another fiscal cliff for us when that money is spent down. We think we can increase the building usage funds by $10,000, and we would increase that now to the total would be $30,000 that we would help support our facility line items with that. And then the last piece that left us was $75,000, and so my suggestion was that we increase the school choice offset by $75,000, which now takes us to $537,052. We're anticipating, Jenny, I want to say the number is $450,000 for school choice is what we're anticipating bringing in, right? One of the things that we're also thinking about is we have not historically had school choice openings at the academy. And we currently, next year, we will have 6 staff members who we allow by contract for their children to come into the district who haven't been picked up in the school choice lottery so far. And so one of my recommendations would be that we actually open up grade 9 school choice lottery for 6 or 7 seats. We could have a potential 7th staff member as well too, their child. If we open that up, then the way that works is that we could potentially, it is an open lottery, so other people could apply as well too. But best case scenario, we could actually recoup the fact that we're supporting the staff members, and we could get the school choice money for those students
From their sending district.
from their sending
Not
district.
staff member,
Thank
right?
you very much for clarifying that, right?
Yep.
From their sending district. Worst case scenario is that we would still not, that 7 other students would be selected in the lottery, and so we would still be supporting those other students, but that, in any event, it's $5,000 per student, so we're anticipating increasing our school choice intake, if that's something that you feel like you want to support, by $35,000. So that kind of helps me feel a little bit better about the $75,000 here, increasing that just when we don't know, again, how that's going to impact our offset. So that is how we came up with the $300,000 offset. That's our roadmap here.
Okay. And I think it's important to just keep framing these as suggestions.
Yep.
We don't have a new target,
Right.
official target from the town manager yet. These are suggestions that we want to reflect that we heard, and these are how we would get there. And I think it's important too for someone seeing, especially slide 60, why haven't we just done these before, right? But I think it's important to, and the finance subcommittee had this conversation, which was there is a line where it makes sense to go up to what you're expecting to come into these line items. And we haven't
documented those before, but, these are getting close to that, right? Or
Yeah.
going over
Or
them in.
2 or 3 of them would
Yes,
go over,
going
right?
over them.
Yeah, they
right.
are.
Expect-
Sorry,
Yep.
that's my point, yeah.
Can I?
Yep.
Okay, I don't know if we're opening it up.
Sorry.
Which could be okay. I think it depends on where the balances are, right? In some cases, how much buffer, and then historically, how variable has it been? Because if you think it might just be for a year or two, but historically maybe they varied, then we can reevaluate in a couple of years. It just depends the comfort level, that you have on those, on the different accounts and how, yeah, you wouldn't want to set up something in perpetuity that we're constantly going over, because that will not last forever. But if we feel comfortable that there's enough in the account, and that in a couple of years' time things may look differently, or the natural variability will even things out, then
And it's,
maybe that feels okay.
aside from some specific one-time purchase, it's the best way to approach it, right? Like,
Right.
you can't just,
Salaries.
you can't jump some of these up by, 2x the number on here or something, and then you would create that cliff.
No, I
Ming
appreciate
Chen.
that.
For the building usage, I forgot, like, how much do we really have in that account? I don't remember. It's a big number.
It was like
It's not a
90.
big number. It's not a big number right now. Jenny, do you?
Quarter twos and balance is $93,000. I'm gonna toss out that in my presentation later. So because we do see a healthy growth in that building rental account, we see some increase. That's why we think we can increase $10,000 more.
I see.
Towards that facility.
Okay.
Can we repeat that for the mic?
Oh, that, I'm gonna
Oh,
paraphrase.
so, so the question, well, first of all, Jenny said she's actually going to talk about that in a quarter two report.
Yep.
So she's going to talk about what that balance is in there. But it's because it has grown more than we anticipated. It isn't as big a number, to Ming Chen's point, but it has grown more than we had anticipated. We anticipated that it would be growing. It just grew a little bit faster, so that's what we're thinking, that we can increase that offset.
Right, like at the close of FY '23, it had 41,000.
Right.
But we expect to close out FY '24 at 94,000. And to remind the committee too, that those facility fees were relatively new, right? And then we brought on the coordinator and everything, so, that's, I think that's what we had hoped
Right.
would happen when we had originally talked about that. Okay, so for the committee to think about, we've been, we have access to the select board meeting packet tomorrow, which has a discussion point for them to think about 3 or 4 total override scenarios. One is no override scenario, one is 4.6 million, one is an 8.5 million step-in, which means you sort of collect a portion of it the first year and then the full amount the second year. And then the fourth scenario would be a $6 million override, which does line up with the Finance Committee's suggestions. In the memo, I think it's important for all of us to understand, even though it's not our decision, the select board will decide that, but all of those come with some level of staff and service reduction to not ask the taxpayer to fund all of the growth, the expense growth, right? So, not that we're voting on the new numbers tonight, but we do need to vote to approve a budget by the end of February to be captured in the Finance Committee book, which they start writing March 1st in time for town meeting. So we need to be, as a committee, ready to think about voting at our next meeting, scheduled for the 26th. What other information, if any other information, we need to be able to feel comfortable with a vote, and how we think what we're seeing, right, as potential reductions, and how that translates into the different override scenarios.
All of these recommendations so far
would put us in the, is it the 6 mil, would, the 6 million, or if the select board approves the $6 million line override, are there further reductions?
If they put it on the warrant.
If they put it on, I
I just want to use the right words
Yes,
first.
you're right. If they put it on the warrant, are there further reductions we need to potentially make in order to?
I don't think that's clear yet. 'cause-
Okay.
It's not really clear. Jenny, could you come up to the microphone, and help with this? Perhaps,
Yes.
with the conversation you and I had this afternoon,
Or the $6 million.
when we were trying to look at what the potential numbers were in the document that the select board's gonna be looking at, you had, looked at the numbers, and we had looked at what our reductions have been so far, and it was close to,
the total reduction we have from the 7% override to now, we are reaching 5.20.
Hold on, you just switched to percentages,
I know.
Yeah.
so I'm struggling for a minute.
So if we go back, yeah,
So-
thank you, right here.
Okay.
If we're
Yeah.
here, right? So, thank you.
Difference between the 7%, the original request for the override, to the 5.22, the current point we are getting, the difference between those two is $1.1 million, which is very close to the town's 6 million allocation.
When you look at the way, that's where it's hard to see. We're
Yeah.
looking at it from a different angle.
Yeah.
So that's where it's
Right.
hard to, so we looked at it that way, and we said, okay, wait a second, if we look at what that difference is,
Yeah,
then
So from the 7% to
Yes,
the, to the,
from
to
this-
to today's.
To the
From today.
this to this.
So the
Okay, so that-
difference between the 4.6
Yeah.
million
Yes.
and $3.4 million
Right, that
is
makes sense.
$1.1 million.
So that feels like it's close to the 6.
Right, because
potential.
that $6 million override, that's combination for 3 years, from fiscal year 25 to fiscal year 27. So if we apply the allocation 70% to school and 30% to the town, so we are getting close to the target.
So that's where it leaves us
Helpful.
with these are talking points. These are things to be looking at, but it is, until we have, I think, until we just know what, how the conversation goes with the select board tomorrow night, I think it still leaves us in a little bit of a holding pattern. Which also kind of goes back to, I know there have been questions, you've both asked a couple different questions, that I think we can still be talking about, right, in terms of there were questions about athletics. I think we can, if there's more information that we can be providing you based on the different recommendations that we've listed, I think we can continue, we can provide, if we can provide it tonight, we will. If we can provide it between now and the 26th, we will do that. This is sort of the path that it's taken us to, so it's,
Can you also, for someone watching at home that followed some of the previous discussions, can you give an update on PE at WA?
thank you. Yes, so we have had, there's been a lot of communication back and forth about the PE requirement at WA. There were questions as to whether if there were changes to that, what impact could that have? One of the things that we've been looking at, I know Principal Toomey has been doing this. We've been working with Brian Rourke, who's the curriculum coordinator as well, too. We've been talking to different districts. We talked with two of them specifically, two completely different districts that had different reasons for changing their practices around PE, because there was a question about whether they were following the law or whether they weren't following the law. What we've decided that we think is important for us to do is for us, especially now with Principal Toomey as a new principal at WA, as a still relatively new superintendent, I haven't done this since I've been superintendent either, is we're talking about we should put together a working group to actually evaluate the graduation requirements. Look at the whole thing, look at it. We want to kind of start that process this spring and work through the summer so that I think we can have some recommendations for the fall. that if there were any changes of any kind, that then we could try to implement for FY26, looking at it both for, first and foremost, for what is in the best interest of the students at WA, if anything has changed since they were last updated, and if that can help lead to any efficiencies.
Yeah. And I think something we've heard the committee members weigh in at various points too is the sustainability of the staffing model.
Yeah.
Right, so that it's not like, if this is a stable enrollment and we know we're crunched and looking for efficiencies, not just sort of making those section by section decisions, but trying to say, you
Right.
know, what makes sense to
Right.
have this amount of staff.
Right. One of the things that came up recently is like that. Yes, there have been concerns about whether the PE requirement was creating scheduling issues. I think that's fair to say that any sort of requirement is going to impact choices, right? So nobody's saying that wouldn't have had an impact on students' ability to take choices. Students do have to be somewhere, though. And so one of the things is that if we found that based on the students' course selection this spring, that the Westford Academy thinks that it might make more sense to have a different reduction based on those numbers, that's still, I think, a possibility, right? But one of the questions was whether or not if we reduced our PE staff, would we be saving money? And there's no guarantee that would be the case, because the students have to be somewhere. And what we do know is that the PE classes are fully subscribed.
But I think one of the questions around it was, if they didn't have to do PE as well, would they fill other classes?
It could
as
impact.
well?
It could
That's, I
impact
think,
other.
the
No,
other
that's
side of that
no.
as
That's
well,
a.
yeah.
I think that
Yeah.
there could be some truth to that.
Yeah.
One of the things that we know, though, is that students have also not been taking. Some students have been, by and large, choosing to double up on some subject areas in the scheduling algorithm that exists at a high school, right? When we have singleton classes, that becomes a challenge everywhere. So our goal is to try to minimize those conflicts. And I know Mr. Toomey is committed to that. And that's something that we had already talked about, is that I think we need to put together a working group that would include administration, include teachers, include students, it could include parents, to kind of look at, okay, what are we doing right now? Is this the best we can be doing? Is there something that we should adjust?
And I think it's a great idea starting that timeline in the spring.
Yeah.
In advance of the FY26 budget.
Right.
Remington?
So one of the data point which I would like to say, so that like it gave people a clear picture, is like, for example, in different override scenarios, it's lump sum together. I would like to say, hey, for this override scenario, how much going to the school, how much going to the town? Because like from here, right, the town only gives the school 2% increase. So that leaves only like another 2.1 million for the school, right? So like exactly how much the town is getting, how much the school is getting. I want to see the breakdown, and
Like the allocation.
yeah, because like without that, I have no idea. It's like whether the school is getting its fair share, what the town is getting its fair share.
Yeah, have you, I guess I just want to ask if you've had a chance to look through the memo and realize whether or not that answers your question?
No, it doesn't,
Okay,
right?
okay.
Because in every single scenario, it doesn't really give me to say exactly.
Are you looking for the number growth year over year? Because, I mean, it does show that, like,
Percent, 30-70.
that's a split of the, like, how we're sharing the deficit,
Right.
right? So for the out years, FY26 and FY27, and this is a great point, we've talked about, like, how we need to keep educating this point too, that what we're seeing is the impact for FY25.
Right.
What I think is important for everyone to understand too is that in all of these scenarios, this is a multi-year deficit, and in FY26 and FY27, in the models, that deficit that changes based on the override amount is shared
by 70% of the schools making up that deficit and 30% of the town departments making.
Yeah, and then because the town allocation to the school, for example, only 2% this year, right, instead of 2.89%.
So that's the growth from last year's number
Yeah.
you're looking for.
Yeah.
Okay.
So no, not only that, because that changed, so the allocation 70% to school may be masking the problem, right? Because we're not getting 2.89%. So it seems like the school is getting 70%, but actually it's not. If we think if the school is getting 2.89% by the last 2 years standard, then we're not really getting the 70% allocation.
Okay. Yeah, Chris.
I guess to piggyback on that, I would just hope that I know it's difficult. I mean, especially when we're juggling so many scenarios. And so, and I understand some of the thinking between 30-70, but I think it's really important to look at the impacts, to services. And I can't urge enough for everyone involved in the process to really look at that. And I think about how we have new contracts because we were not paying, equitable market basket salaries to large swaths of our staff, whereas maybe other units in the town were already meeting that commitment. We're able to meet that commitment over the years where we have not been able to meet that commitment. And that's a town-wide commitment that every town department is going to pay, market basket wages. I think just how special education costs have affected us, how transport, there's so many things that I think are unique that I worry about 30-70 as a blanket allocation without saying what are the actual impacts. And again, I recognize the challenge in trying to do, it's like trying to build an airplane while it's in the air, right? Like we've got all these things going and we've got timelines but I want to keep that in the front of people's minds as we go to look at the impacts. And I really, really appreciate the work, meeting after meeting, these slides at the end, that go, the thoughtful, deliberate process to come up with other things we can do, but we're really pushing. And I know I've had this feeling, you don't want to get numb to seeing these reductions.
Right.
I think the first meeting, we're like, and now we're like, okay, oh yeah, and we have to remember.
These are people.
These are
Yes.
people, and these are impacting students.
Yep.
Right.
In real
Right, we are-
tangible ways.
Right. We are, this isn't paper and pencils. We are impacting student-facing services. And I'm going to just use that as a segue because I know not everybody maybe can navigate the town. So when we're saying something is in a select board packet, maybe not everybody knows the 17 clicks to get there. But I think it's important to talk about that in like the no override scenario, for example, over 3 years, the deficit, I just had this. The deficit is like 11.7 million total, town and schools. And just for like projection purposes, the memo does outline how that would get split 70-30 and uses a $70,000 salary to just give a framework to think about how that
How many
translates to
people?
FTEs. And I think it's like, it's good and bad, right? Because sometimes people can't think about, well, what would, so like in that scenario with no override, the school reductions would be 2.7 million, and then in the next year, 6 million, and then, am I
That's
looking at the-
cumulative.
Sorry, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong chart.
But the same thing is it adds up, so that after 3 or 4 years, we would
Right.
have then had to have reduced, it was like 135
35.
FTEs.
I guess my point is you can talk about millions of dollars, but it's hard to think about what's impact. And now we're talking about in FY '25, $1 million is this, and another $1 million is that. And so trying to put it in the framework for families to understand and for us to understand, with no override over the next 3 years, that would be a loss of up to 135 school staff.
And one of the things that we were talking about, again, trying to remember that this is not just a one-year issue, but one of the things, even in the no override scenario, where we have significant reductions that we would need to make for FY '25 that we've talked about,
There it
for
is.
a couple of months now. One of the things in that scenario we've been able to do is we've been able, for FY '25, to preserve the class sizes for the most part. So sometimes people see that and they go, oh, well, that's not so bad. But the reality is that that cannot be preserved in FY '26 or FY '27, because in FY '25, we will have removed everything that we could have. And so in FY '26, the elementary classrooms will have to be 27 to 30 students in a class
With no override.
with no override. Did I say that correctly? No.
You did at the beginning, I just want to keep.
Yeah, thank you. And then, I mean, so that's just something that I think is important for people to see, those different realities, right?
Yeah.
My kind of next question or thought is, so select board will make their suggestion, recommendation tomorrow night, and we will hopefully finally have some solid numbers that we're working with. At this moment in time, we've got one meeting scheduled for February 26th, which we know, based on FinCom's need to get their book ready, we would have to vote that day or within the next 2 or 3 days. Do we need to have another meeting where we essentially, because we've had so many, suggestions, recommendations, I mean, the list has kept growing, where with our final number, we say, this is it, this is what it looks like, and have a thorough discussion on something more tangible now before voting on it, as opposed to turning up, kind of seeing the final budget in front of us and voting on that same meeting. And I kind of come back to as well, I know we've done a lot of public input and time for feedback and public budget hearings and stuff, but do we need, we made that commitment to ourselves to do at least 2, if not 3 meeting cycles. I don't know. And I'll be honest, because one of the recommendations that was put out 2 weeks ago, or I can't even remember this meeting.
Last meeting.
Last meeting, yeah, is something that I would still like to kind of dive into a little bit, in terms of the interventionists, and I know I had emailed you, the middle school one, because I know we haven't looked at the elementary interventionist yet, so I just don't know at what point.
Can I
We can
answer
have-
that?
yeah.
So
please.
my thought there, and what I was trying to allude to a little bit earlier, just knowing that you had asked a question, I know Chris had asked a different question as well too. I think at this moment in time, I've shown you a roadmap that has very specific numbers attached to it. And so when we know if we've gone past the number that we need to go past, or if we've not yet hit the number that we need to hit,
Yeah.
once we know that,
Yeah.
then I feel like then we can have other conversations, because I never want to say like, oh, there's still a chance, as we've been having these difficult conversations with people, but the other piece is that we are then ultimately looking at a number,
Yeah.
and we can still discuss the ways in which we get to that
Yeah.
number, right? So if there's questions about, well, I had this recommendation, but the committee didn't think that that was the right recommendation, we could go back and forth as to, whether I provide more information so that you're comfortable with the recommendation, or if you're not, and whether it's something that we still need to do, or, what, I think there's still room for that conversation, even outside of maybe even the potential number vote. If we then figure out, have we met where we need to be, or did we actually surpass where we need to be, which means there might be some flexibility with some of those recommendations.
Did that answer your
Just
question?
more food for thought.
Well,
No,
I think,
I can see that. Yeah.
I think what's sort of upon us is on the 26th, we're gonna have a target of, like he said, like Dr. Chu was saying, it's either gonna be this or below or above
Yeah.
the 69,
Yeah.
$329, $101. And then if we're up against the deadline for the FinCom book, that could still be this vote that, yes, we are approving this budget number to go to town meeting.
But not necessarily the.
I mean, I still think that, like, we at least need the, what's in there
right.
Yeah.
solidified before town meeting.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because you want voters to know what they're at risk of.
Right.
But I guess putting it in that frame does give us maybe like one more meeting into March.
And I guess that's kind of what Jenny and I were trying to figure out too, when we were looking at this bottom number here, as we were breaking it down, we're like, okay, well, we know what the no override means, right? We've known what that meant the whole time, so we're able to, we've looked at that. And then it was this, okay, what is this other moving target? So then within the I think you said 4.6 earlier, but it's 7.6.
7.6, yeah.
Oh, sorry.
7.6,
I wouldn't be
8.5,
surprised.
or 6.
Yes, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so
7.6,
we
8.5.
think that this gets us close to the 6, what we would need to do for the 6 million scenario. That's what we think.
Okay.
I mean, we'll just have to talk with Kristen and Dan more specifically to see if what they're looking at and what we're looking at is the same. But that means that if it's a decision anywhere else that the select board decides to go in, then that's where we have a better idea as to.
And the one other piece that I really want to make sure we react to, or at least clarify for anyone watching, is that even though, again, we are now dipping into student-facing, student-servicing positions, a $6 million override still has ripple ramifications for FY '26 and FY '27 that are not level services
Right.
or pleasant. So
Or
while
opening a door that we don't know what's on the other
it's
side
going
yet.
to.
We
Right.
can't quantify that.
Right.
That was my next question, is to what level do we think we can quantify? I mean, we certainly know town-wide numbers, and then you can do the allocation. I mean, does it even make sense to try to prognosticate, what that means, just so people know? I mean, I feel like at town meeting, people need to understand.
right.
Well,
If,
I mean, we kind
if
of.
you vote for this,
Right,
it's this,
so-
but it's also this,
Right, like, so again, using that like $70,000 as an
Yeah.
equivalent FTE, in the $6 million override over 3 years, that's 56 school staff members. And what the wording in here is cumulative school staff reductions of up to 50 personnel, math and reading interventionist services are affected, elective options are reduced, and some class sizes are increased.
So basically, the things that we said would happen in FY '25 with no override, what we
Those
did,
start to happen.
what reductions we didn't make, we would
Just
still have to
shifting them.
eventually.
They're shifting.
we'd shift
Probably a good way
Right.
to.
So I think this is something like even people sitting on this table are not very clear and got confused because they're around it. So I'm actually looking at the 6 million override table, which says like equivalent job 5 for FY '25, then 26 for FY '26, then 56 for FY '27 on that table, right? The one you quoted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like, I look into Dr. Chu's slide for FY '25, and that's more than 5. So like, what's the difference between
Yeah,
these two?
so that's a good question, right? When you look through that whole document, you'll see both the town and the schools. There might be a number right at the top that says what the FTE is, but then when you read the description, the number doesn't add up to that. Part of that is because it's an estimated number of the $70,000. Part of it's because some of the positions aren't set. They don't make $70,000, so it might take 2 positions in order to actually make that one $70,000 target. So sometimes those numbers are a little bit different there, but that's why once we started moving into the estimates for 26 and 27, they really are just knowing that some of those reductions could also come from other things. Because one of the things that's not listed in there is, for example, the offsets. that we're
Right.
talking about.
But hold on, because I want to stay on this for a second, because I don't think I've done a good job explaining it. But I think that's exactly the point, is that if you said over 3 years, the schools will have to react to $3.9 million of reductions, which is the $6 million override. We have a deficit for the schools of $3.9 million by FY '27. That means nothing to most people, right? I mean, it sounds like a big number, but
Yeah.
it's just a framework to be able to think about how many FTEs that could represent. It doesn't mean, I mean, that's just how, and I've heard this said too, like, it's not a scare tactic. It's just that's how budget projections work, is that you're trying to help people think about a framework of what millions of dollars means to the service of schools.
And to connect it, our no override scenario earlier in this presentation is reducing $3.2 million. So the staff reductions that we had and then
Right.
the offsets that we included equaled $3.2 million. So that's kind of that idea that the $6 million override is taking this scenario and it's spreading it out over a couple of years.
Right.
So you're still looking at
And-
potential reductions.
And I guess I just want to circle back too, that like, the select board has to decide on which scenario to bring to town meeting. And I know that they are hearing, different taxpayers or residents saying lower, or what's the right trade-off in balance of trade-offs. So I understand that's a difficult position. I just want to make sure that the people who follow school committee understand that lowering the total override amount has these ripple effects throughout multiple years. So even things that we are working so hard to preserve in FY '25, with a $6 million override, will they still be there in 3 years? We don't know.
Well put.
So here's the other question is, should we be considering, as a committee, FinCom have made a recommendation to select board. They've given three, at the moment, select board are looking at 3 scenarios. I don't know if we can, as a group, advocate, support one or over the other, or, kind of make a statement to select boards. I mean, obviously, I would assume in most circumstances, love to support our schools at, fund them at what the 8.5 potentially million, or do we feel that, maybe the 7.6? I don't know, it just kind of throwing it out there as, what can we do in terms of a group, now that the select board are considering these 3 options, should we also be looking at adding our voice to that?
I would say it's challenging for them if they don't necessarily know what the impacts are in each one.
Yeah.
Because I think, what Valerie says, like, they have a decision to make based on the information that they have right in front of them in their meeting, and so so if there is something that the committee supported, I think helping them, at least giving them that information could be helpful.
Any other thoughts?
I'm just wondering what form that takes.
Yeah, I don't know
Yeah.
either.
You can always walk up to a select board meeting.
Right, we
Got a select board member
I mean,
here, so he's listening. I know he's paying attention.
If only we knew someone.
tuned for tomorrow night.
Yeah. I mean, I think I said this at our first budget meeting about the no override situation, but when you talk about FY '26, FY '27, it really does put it in a very similar light, and I think my word was, it fundamentally changes the nature of Westford Public Schools that
Yep.
people have
Yep.
known for,
It
25
changes
plus
the
years.
floor, I think, too.
Yeah.
From having worked in the field for 15 years, and again, personal experience, but it changes the floor. And, you can't quantify that right now. And that's the unknown that people should be aptly worried about. Interventionists, just teacher reductions, offerings.
Yeah.
Well, I think this is a tough situation. Every family has to actually do the calculation.
Yeah.
Because many people also say, hey, I cannot afford gas or grocery,
Yeah.
right? So it's definitely a dedicated or delicate balance right? Like that's why like originally the $8 million, I feel it's like a little bit too much. Although we need it, but it doesn't mean we will get it. So hopefully we can find some middle ground, which like the best thing is it's a number which we have agreed upon, which actually make better, much better than like the old lower scenario, right? If you push the envelope too much, then you may lose what you could have.
That is the risk.
And I think that's a good point, and I would just encourage, if residents were waiting for a lower number, the summary table does show like that this 7.6 million, which started as sort of like, well, not started, but has the least amount of reductions, is really only less than $200 away per average home value tax bill from the $6 million override. So I think theoretically maybe people thought they were much further away on the impact on your pocketbook, but they're really, and then so the decision really is what level of service trade-offs are residents comfortable with. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice. So, I mean, I just want to make sure that we are either saying we're comfortable with a vote of some sort on the 26th that would be in front of us, right? And so I'm hearing maybe another one would be nice, but also that if we were voting on a number for town meeting, that we would feel mostly okay with that. And I would, again, encourage all of us to be looking at these new proposals and reaching out, reach out to Dr. Shu if you have requests for additional data, because we're kind of running out of time for that. But I want everybody to have what they need to feel comfortable. And then I guess the only other piece that we didn't circle back to would be if there's any, I mean, like we're all able to speak at another public meeting with our resident hat on, and even by identifying ourselves as school committee members, but if there's some sort of consensus that we feel like we should share with the select board as they make this decision, I would need to know that to be able to pass that on as chair. And I don't have anything drafted that we would react to, but, and it doesn't necessarily have to be in favor of one. It could be that, like, I guess my personal opinion would be that I think scenario 4 with a $6 million override, like you said, will change the face of Westford Public Schools over 3 years. Now, that doesn't mean that that's the wrong choice for the taxpayer or that's the wrong choice for the select board, but it makes me feel a little bit better to know that we're saying that as a school committee who are responsible for advocating for our school district.
It's challenging too, because I think most members of select board and FinCom and this committee would agree that the best number is one that the voters agree is the best number. Or that the voters are willing by the right proportion to pass, you know, and so to your point, right, like something's better than nothing. But I also say that those 3 boards have influence. And so, you know, when they take a stand on a number, the public listens, not always, the public doesn't always listen, but sometimes. And so I don't know where that necessarily leaves us, but, you know, that's where obviously we're doing better with a larger override as a district, and that's, I think we would all prefer to be budgeting based on that. Like that certainly makes, you know, the district where we want it to be, but it's tricky to pick one. I mean, to say, because it just depends.
I mean, the other approach we could say is to advocate for the 7.6 potential override, because that is the one that has the least amount of impact on our staff. Because if you look at the 8.5, which is a step-in approach, we would still end up cumulatively by FY '28, be losing about 30 positions, FTEs, 30.40, whereas in FY '28, we'd be looking at 22.
But I want to go back to the allocation formula again, because for FY '25, we got the 2% allocation plus the override, right? Which is like much lower than normally our 2.89%. That's one thing which I really don't feel comfortable about.
Yeah.
Why are we actually got dimmed when there is an override? Then in FY '26 and '27 calculation, what percentage are we getting? Are we getting another 2% plus override, 1%, 0%, 5%, 10%? What's the real number, right, based on those models? It doesn't tell me.
Okay. So you think we should be kind of agreeing, like, almost in advance, what would the allocation be for FY '26 and FY '27?
There must have some, right? Because there is some number thrown out there, but like, it just, I don't know what the allocation is.
And I mean, I will say that in part of my, just looking at what other communities have done, there have been MOUs as part of overrides in other communities that say, here's what we are strategizing or planning for and expect, right? And so that's not unheard of to sort of clarify that.
Yeah, because my concern is like, people say I want to support the schools, but then like everything is lumped sum together. So I don't know really actually my money is supporting the schools.
Okay.
I think my thinking is probably more consistent with Catherine's, which is that, actually, Valerie, you suggested this too, is not necessarily advocating for one of the three, but at least taking one off the table for tomorrow. And at least for me, it's pretty easy to take that $6 million override off the table, particularly like if you just do the math on it, right? That results in the greatest number of staff reductions for the district when you're looking at a difference of $71 a month in the $7.6 million override versus a $56 a month for the $6 million override. So a difference of, what is that, $25 a month for the average household. It's the type of impact that it would have on them for, which would cost us, the schools, an extra 26 full-time equivalencies. So, I don't know, just simple math. I understand that we're uncomfortable with all of it, right? But it just strikes me that run the numbers, let's just take one off the table, like.
Because if you think of it, okay, if they vote in for a 6 million override and our taxes are going up, we're so close to the bone of what a no override would have been in terms of cuts that you kind of feel like I'm paying more, but it feels like we could have almost not increased our taxes at all because you're so close in terms of what we would be losing as well.
Just to clarify, you're close to the FY '25 bone.
The FY '25 bone, you're right, yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
you're still light years away from the FY '27.
Yeah.
Right.
But I hear you.
Take that fine, yeah.
I hear you. I think that's, if nothing else, and whatever kind of gets decided, I think our job over the next couple months, or as this flushes out, is to educate families and voters on that people think of an override as solving everything, right? Like, oh, it's an override, you're getting more taxes, so this must be level services. We need to be really clear that, come next December, you're still gonna see some reductions, no matter which of these scenarios it is.
Because it's what, 11.7 million deficit over 3 years?
Right.
And at most, the top the top override you'd be looking at is 8.5. So there's still a deficit.
Yes.
That we have to go.
Yes, and that's fair to me, that like this is this big trade-off, this big gap. So these scenarios are trying to bridge that with balancing those two trade-offs between the taxpayer impact and the service impact. But I just want to make sure that we are doing our best to educate families and voters about this is not just FY25.
Right.
Circling back to what Ming Chen was saying, I mean, do we start the conversation with the town now, once they have decided tomorrow night, on mapping out what that allocation looks like for the next 3 years, for FY26 and FY27?
I think that's one of the things which bite us in the 2017 override is like after that, then the school budget got dimmed.
Yeah.
And then people have bad taste for that as
Yep.
well.
I think that's a fair discussion point. So
Yeah.
we'll bring that up with our partners and.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I don't want to go too long, and we do have Jenny to present FY24 Q2.
Where do we land on then?
Oh,
making
sorry.
Something, or suggesting something, or a statement?
You're right, sorry, I jumped too
No,
early.
you're fine.
Let me think of, Sean was in favor of, or no, Sean, your opinion was to speak against the $6 million override.
Yeah, I think it's just that.
Yours was to speak in favor of 7.6.
Yeah, I would do either or. Yeah.
There's something to be said for just providing them, oh, John's got his hand up. There's something to provide, with just saying from our perspective,
Yeah.
based on these numbers,
Yeah.
the $6 million override is delaying
Yeah.
what we're looking at having to deal with a
yeah.
no override. It's not necessarily helping to fix anything, it's just delaying that.
Except if we like have a pre-arranged percentage point from the town. That's where we can actually say, hey, why is 2%? Why not 2.89%, which we used to get?
Right. I will say, I
Because
mean, to that
1%,
point, though.
that's a lot of money.
Right, so, no, that's true. We have received 2.89% for the first 2 years that I was superintendent. One of the things that Jenny and I also did was to project out in a no override scenario, what increase would we need in FY '26? And what increase would we need in FY '27 in order to then not, still be just slashing, and it was still, those numbers were still like a 5.26, and then they were still like in the 5% ranges where we're at right now. So, to your point, like, I wouldn't want to be like, can you just give us 2.89 again? Because that's not gonna, that's,
Because like the 70-30 split
right,
for FY25 is based on the 2%,
right.
right?
Okay.
So actually it's not 30-70 because like the 30-70 split can be arbitrary. Because we could get 0%,
Yep.
then we can get like 90% of the override money, right? But that means nothing.
Yeah.
The
Okay.
percentage means nothing.
So, too many numbers, Sean?
No. I'm just thinking. Jen, I completely agree with you, and I think it's a very valid point. It's my understanding of what they're voting on tomorrow is just one of the options. Like the 70-30 seems to be, we can call it arbitrary or not, but it's something that they've determined for the purposes of their decision tomorrow. So I would suggest let's not worry about that right now and just focus on option 1, 2, or 3, or at least take one off the table, so we can convey that tomorrow, so they at least have some insight from us.
Okay.
as to what-
I don't want to interrupt our deliberation. We also have a practice to not take comments from the audience in the middle of deliberations, but since we have a fellow elected official in the audience, is everyone okay if we call on Johnny who's raising his hand? Any? Did you have something you want to add, John?
Yeah, well, we act like this is only gonna be one thing. It's gonna be a long slog here because I think we're.
Just the microphone.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. I think it's gonna be a long slog for us to get through this.
Yeah.
Because we've built into the system, where I think we're gonna be doing override on a regular basis, to tell you the honest truth, when you look at the numbers. To what Sean said here, the difference between the 7.6 million override and the 6 million override, according to this latest document, is $180 a month.
A year.
A
I mean, a year.
Yeah.
$180 a year difference.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I personally, I'm speaking here personally, I don't have a portfolio to represent the select board on this, but it's the impact on the taxpayer. The one thing I didn't want to see was a $1,000 increase to their tax bill. Some of the things that kind of stick out in my mind, and I know this hits a nerve, is when I looked at the increase for the contracts. I think 300 and some odd thousand was the number. And that's actually about a 6%, when you look at the budget for salaries, about a 6% increase. And I think I look at that and I say, I don't know that that's sustainable, especially if you're talking about 80% of your budget. It's not really sustainable with the 2.5% override limit. And just thinking about that, think of how do you cover that gap? How do you bridge that? Because it's going up every year. And you can see that as you go through the 3 years.
Yeah.
And so, I'm not here to debate that.
Yeah.
I know that there's settled contracts. I know we had a goal for a median, meeting the median of the DART towns. And I look at that, was the target median, the real target? Should have been a little bit lower than that. What are the experiences that the actual, employees doing? And then I look at the other aspects of this, and you were mentioning about the impact to the school system, and here you talk about the scenario of 6 million override. Town service positions reduced by more than 20, 15 affecting public safety, police, firefighters, paramedics. So there's a parallel to I hear and I feel the anguish that you have and the concerns that you have, and we have the same concerns. I have the same concerns as a citizen. Somehow we've got to come to a balance here. You can talk about the 70-30 if you want, but I don't want to see us laying off people. I think we're going to have to address this. Whatever we do this time, we're going to have to rinse and repeat. I think we're on if you look at how we go forward at this, and you're going to have to look at how we, it may be the goal that we set for contracts. Maybe it needs to be a little bit lower. What can the town afford? You look at the citizenry. What are the citizens experiencing here? We are an affluent town, but are we asking too much? And that's the things that kind of go around in my head.
Yeah.
And this was very informative. I really appreciate what you're doing and trying. But we can go after these 50,000 here, 6,000 here, but there's some fundamental things in this system that are driving this thing, that's driving this train. And you need to look at this, how we impact that. If we can impact it, then we're going to wind up with the reductions you're talking about. If we were in a business, you go up too high, pretty soon it's going to affect the numbers. And I hate to see that. So if it's going to affect the numbers, then you say which numbers, which ones affect the students the least, which ones. I hate to see that. Maybe the town meeting will say, go for the whole thing. Maybe the town meeting would say, and we're going to have an interesting audience at this town meeting. I know I'm straying. I don't want to keep you.
That's okay.
I'm just,
Yep.
These are my thoughts. But the town meeting could say, the heck with this. I want to go full force here.
Yeah.
Then you got to worry about the ballot.
Yeah.
As we saw the last time there was an override, the seniors came back from Florida and they said, we don't like what you did while we were gone. I wasn't in Florida, by the way.
So I feel like I just need to correct one piece of information.
What's that?
I just think it's important for anybody who's listening that I think what you're saying in terms of whether something is sustainable and whether the system needs to be addressed it's important for everybody to understand that we are not doing something that is different than every other school system in the state of Massachusetts. So like our contracts are based on the same contracts that other people have. And so what we're looking at is trying to fix a gap that had been created. But in terms of like the idea of whether we're going to start paying people less or doing something different with our contracts, we are following what is the best practice within the school industry, right, in itself. So that's I just feel like that's one of the things that becomes a fundamental difference sometimes.
Well, then that's the reason I mentioned the goal.
Yeah.
You know, if you look at those DART systems, you got 4 outliers up there that there's, I don't know what, they're out there.
Yeah, Wellesley
And
and,
that's
yeah,
so
yeah.
maybe if you look at the average earnings of a citizen in Westford versus them, we're in the lower. You look down there, out of the 12, we're 7 and 12 out of one thing, 8 and 12 out of another, 9 and 12 on another. Then you say, okay, should we be looking for being 6 out of 12? Well, the population's down here.
Well, I didn't
want to get into this argument, Chris, but it's just, I just put this out as thinking about this, and think about when you're going for the next round.
Yeah.
Think about the target, and you know, we can play this. We can get on this merry-go-round of comparing.
Yeah.
And you're being compared to some very different towns. I don't care what that DART group says.
We've changed that though this year as well.
Yeah, we changed, but I'm just, and I want to reiterate, I'm just talking as a citizen, trying to be helpful.
Yeah.
I
Appreciate
hope.
it. Yep.
But I think that, you know, I don't think the town could just sit here and get a $1,000 increase in their real estate bill, and then 3 years from now, look at another one, and then look for another one.
Yeah, it's definitely a delicate balance.
Yeah.
And so I'm just trying to get the mind thinking. We're going to go through this tomorrow night. It's going to be a fun night.
Yeah.
I mean, it's going to be tough. And I think the reasoning we were looking something in the middle there, at least I am. And I brought this up about making sure that we understand the impact of every decision we make on the taxpayer.
Yep.
Make sure we understand the impact on our public safety, and understand the impact on our school system.
Mm-hmm.
It could mean we don't offer, you know, smorgasbord of courses.
Right.
Yeah.
It could mean that we change the schedule a little bit, or we do something.
Yeah.
And you guys have you have an important part here. You could come to town meeting and say, we don't like what the select board and town manager did. We agreed to it in a certain way.
One step at a time. I'm gonna rein you in so we can get back on
I'm
the agenda.
sorry.
Thank you
Okay.
so much,
Look,
John.
I just thought I wanted to correct one thing I thought was a misstatement about the difference in the
numbers.
6 million and the 7.8 million.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then
Okay.
just to tell you that what my concerns are as a citizen here.
Great.
And I really appreciate listening, and I understand, and I understand where you're coming from.
Okay.
Thanks, John.
Thanks for
Thank
joining
you.
us.
Thank you.
Yeah. I really didn't want to say anything.
You couldn't help
Waving
it.
me down.
But I'm glad you clarified.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and I do think it's important also that it's a methodology that the town-wide has adopted.
Right.
And so, like, if we don't like it, we should change that across all town departments and say, we are no longer aiming for
Right.
median of our
And-
market
and-
baskets, right? And we can do that. We can
Fi-
say, we're gonna aim for the bottom 30%.
Finance Committee recommendation, I'm reading it here. The town list has not changed in roughly 20 years. Towns have changed, and the list may not be comparable anymore. School list based on the DESI suggestions, the DART districts, are for benchmarking.
Yeah.
We have to determine as a town, I think we're at a fundamental point where we want to prioritize and think about how we benchmark. And that takes all committees and all boards.
'Cause
Takes
it's
everyone
not
at the
fair
table.
if we're like under benchmark for
Yeah.
one department in the town, but over or at, you know.
It's just
in
a
other
function of the
departments.
math, right? That we
Yeah.
can't make that correction within our operating budget.
Yeah,
So it's unfortunate reality that every time there is that gap, like in 2017,
Yeah.
it's up to the taxpayers to validate our values. And I will just say too that thanks, John. I will
Thanks,
just
John.
say
See you
too
tomorrow.
that the DART districts, to me, the more I looked into that with the budget task force, speaks to the
Job experience.
the per capita might be different in this list, but the students in front of the teacher in those
districts are the same based on their metrics.
Yes.
So number of ELL students, number of students with disabilities, number of high needs learners, all of those things. So we're asking these teachers and these staff to do the same job as they are doing in this other district,
Yep.
and that's the average that we used. I think that is a valuable thing to stand by. I appreciate our commitment to that, and that's.
And just to make sure we're very clear, we changed the metric this year, so not just using DART districts, but
We
we're
added
now
adjacent.
using
Brought
the
the adjacent so that it
Adjacents
actually
too,
grounds
yeah.
that.
Exactly.
So that it's not, and it actually, I feel like it has actually grounded it.
I think,
And that's
yeah.
that is what the typical experience is for, I think, most districts, is they use it, they look at the geography, and they look at what Desi's saying as well, too, so that you have those cross-reference things. But I think it's a good point. I believe there is strong methodology in what we did, you know, and I feel like it, I feel like it makes a lot of sense.
We've shared at various steps
Yeah.
publicly, so, yeah.
Yeah.
I think what I'm deciding to do is that everyone is welcome, and hybrid options are available to speak as individuals at the select board tomorrow night, if anyone would like to. But for the case of tonight, I'm gonna move us on to FY '24 Q2 update with Jenny.
Do we need to?
Because it's late. Yes.
That's switch gear to
Confrontation.
Q2 financial report. I will try to be clear and short. So I will provide you on the fiscal year 24's Q2 financial status update. Can someone just
I'm pulling it up.
pulling out their PowerPoint slide?
Yep, sorry, the page disappeared on me, so I am just getting into it.
We all individually have the
Package
packet.
as well, yeah.
So that's really just for
sure.
the viewers at home, if you want to get started.
Okay, in the first slide, let's start analyzing fiscal year 24 Q2 general funds financial status compared to fiscal year 23's Q2. And this chart summarizes the total percentage used by individual function code in our general fund. And at the end of December, the total budgeted salary have been fully encumbered. The unencumbered available general fund appropriation is $3,024,876. This number is located on the bottom line of this chart, the fourth column. And this number is approximately $98,000 less than last fiscal year. So if you see the total percentage used, we have used 95.41%. If you move to the third slide, compared to fiscal year 23's Q2, we spent 95.12%. So the total spending level maintained at the same level as last fiscal year. So this is just an overview for the summary. Let's just get into the individual state function code. I will briefly emphasize a couple individual state function code where we can observe some percentage difference. The first one is function code 3000 transportation. Here are the data for this fiscal year and last fiscal year. And it shows $280,000 increase in the transportation cost. I have highlighted a couple notable outliers here. The most significant one is the regular day for the transportation expenditure. You see a $192,000 increase in regular transportation. It's important to clarify that we didn't spend $192,000 more, because in fiscal year 23, we have APA fund support for our transportation, the total amount $180,000. So if you add it up from fiscal year 23's $492,000 to that $180,000, the total spending by the second quarter of last year was $670,000 673,000, which is close to this year's 684,000. So if we take consideration of upper fund impact, the net increase for our transportation is close to $100,000. So that's directly related to special education transportation, which involves the van driver's salary increase, 11,282, the vehicle maintenance cost, 35,000, transportation contracted service for special education, $42,000, and also gasoline cost, $10,000. So we are at the half-year mark. So the total deficit already exceed the proposed the budget for $100,000. By the end of the fiscal year, we could project total around $200,000 over the special education transportation lines. So based on the data, it kind of support our decision to outsource the special education fleet. Hopefully we can see some saving in fiscal year 25. The next slide is function code.
So for the vehicle maintenance, is it because those vehicles are at the age when they need major maintenance?
Exactly, because some of them are already getting close to 150,000 miles. That's why we are paying a lot for the repair and maintenance costs. So we just see those repair and maintenance costs increasing from year to year, from last year to this year.
Okay, thank you.
Next slide is function code 4000, operation and maintenance. For this function, we have spent 91% in the second quarter of fiscal year 24. Compared to fiscal year 23, that's 2% higher than last fiscal year. This chart gives you a visual illustration of our spending. The blue bar represents fiscal year 24's quarter 2. The orange bar represents fiscal year 23's quarter 2. If we look at the big spending categories, the function code 4120, heating of the buildings, and function code 4130, utility services, we see there's a decrease for the school heating and utility costs in fiscal year 24. However, we do see an increase for function code 4110, which is custodial services. You might be wondering what's included in the custodial services. So next slide gives you a breakdown for the 3 major categories in this function code. The first one is salary. We do see an increase for $57,000 for our salary. This number in line with our new contract settlement for fiscal year 24. We do see a decrease in the subbing expenditure for $5,954, while the overtime cost is on the rise. So it appears that we are facing the challenge to secure the custodian substitutes, leading to escalated overtime costs for the salary.
Sorry, do we have, when you say substitute with the custodians, is this just on a ad hoc basis if custodians are out sick for whatever leave, as opposed to like a long-term?
Could be both.
It's both.
Could be both.
And we don't have any open custodian positions right now.
Correct.
Yeah.
So one of the challenges have been, there was actually one position that was open for a long time.
Yeah.
Which actually was one of the reasons why we had significant overtime, because we had two or three different people who were trying to cover that shift.
Yeah.
As opposed to being able to find a sub.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this line is function code 5,000, which is benefit insurance and leases. You can see the percentage went up about 10%. The major reason is because in the function code 5300, that's rental leases of equipment. That's the lease cost for our recall copier and printer. We fully encumber the full fiscal year's cost, which is 86,000. So the total budget actually is at the same level. So that's just purely connected to the encumbrance cost. Nothing need to be worried about. Next one is function called 9,000 out of district tuition. The total amount we budgeted for fiscal year 24's projected out of district tuition is 5.6 million. We already fully applied fiscal year 23's 2.4 million from the circuit breaker fund and 820,000 from grant 240 in the ledger. So the available balance based on current projection by the end of fiscal year 24, we will end up with a total deficit $505,000. Next slide shows you the comparison between this year and last year. By the second quarter of last fiscal year, we anticipated 202,000 deficit for special education tuition, and this year the deficit more than doubled. That's directly related to the 14% increase for the special education private school tuition. As we originally budgeted, we are planning to use one-time fund, either from school choice or special education stabilization fund to cover this deficit just for this year. This slide wrap up the general fund, and next one we will discuss about federal grant. Title I 305, we have received 101,000 for the grant funding, which allow us to hire 2 academic coaches to support before and after school for those students who have been identified as the Title I school and students. But for fiscal year 2025, there's no guarantee we will still receive that funding because the preliminary estimate for fiscal year 25 still has a warning flag because that's based on the federal poverty and population data, and if we fall below a certain threshold, we might lose the funding.
So just those academic coaches are working during the school day, and then academic tutors are working before or after school.
Okay, thanks for that.
And everything you just described is in the 101 and new this year?
Correct.
And can you clarify, usually that is, that status is usually by school? So is this only at 1 or 2 schools?
The academic coaches are at Miller School and Day School. The academic after-school or before-school tutoring is being offered at Miller School, Day School, Robinson, Crisafulli,
5 schools.
and maybe Nabnasset. It's kind of a cascading effect depending on what your percentage of Title I.
But this is only guaranteed between now and June.
Well,
That's FY '24.
it can be used for the following year, so if we don't have it all expended to this year, we will make a decision in May when we amend the grant, whether we'll use that funding through the summer, or if it can be carried over into the next school year. If it's carried over into the next school year, it wouldn't be able to sustain a full year-long of academic coaching.
Right.
But we might have some leftover money. At this point, we were only able to hire one of the academic coaches just recently, and so that money is definitely, we will definitely have some money to allocate next year.
And
Also with the Title I, you make the building principal takes a look at the data, determines which school is going to be, require that service, And so at the Miller School, I can speak to that Melissa Boylan had decided that kindergarten was her focus in the area of math. And so that's where that academic coach is really concentrating.
And, sorry, I'm just unclear, this is like September or recent?
It was just recently awarded.
Okay. So it's like middle of the year, okay, cool.
Yes. And the final decision for Title I grant for fiscal year 25 will be announced this summer. So that's the federal grant. State grant, we will receive $100,000 for earmarked for Navnasset playground. The total project cost for the construction is $825,000. The additional funding, $725 to complete that project will be coming from CPA fund.
Tentatively.
Right, and
That's on the, that's on before.
Well, the committee
to go on the
will
warrant.
make their recommendation tomorrow, but then it goes up to town meeting.
something we have to keep in mind, this project duration expiration date is June 30, 24, which is the end of this fiscal year. So we only have very short period of time to complete this whole project. Next
To use
slide.
that earmark.
To use the, yeah, to use
Yes.
the
Earmark, yeah.
Yes. For revolving account, this is just a ballpark number. Fiscal year 24, quarter two's ending fund balance is $2.9 million. Fiscal year 23's quarter two ending balance is $2.5 million. So I would like to highlight two revolving accounts. First one is grade 3 to 5 instructional music fee. You can see 3 years balance carry over from year to year. So that's why Dr. Chu has suggested we increase additional $15,000 in the new budget scenario. We increased it from $120,000 to $135,000, and now we suggested to increase from $135,000 to $150,000 for the music fee to help us to offset the music teacher's salary. So hopefully in the future we can utilize this fund balance to support some music-related program. Next one is our school building usage account. That's the reason we can increase $10,000 for the rental, building rental revolving account, because the changes we had in fiscal year 22 for the fee structure and also on the policy, we see some healthy growth on this building rental revenue account from fiscal year 21's $11,000 to fiscal year 24 quarter two's $93,000. So we can increase the offset to help support the facilities budget.
So are those mostly in the buildings, or that also includes like the school playground, the church, the fields?
No,
It doesn't include the fields.
So only in the building.
Only in the building rental. The last slide is for other revenue funds. The total ending balance for school choice by the second quarter is $1.4 million. As we projected for fiscal year 24, a total offset $441,000 from school choice has been executed in the second quarter, a portion of that. So we already transferred $109,000 to offset the joint funds operating budget. And so we will do an evaluation by the rest of the fiscal year to see how much we will use the school choice to offset the general fund operating budget.
So that's a transfer from the school choice, not to school choice.
Yeah, sorry,
Right.
that's transfer from
I was gonna say, we're not
school
adding
choice
money into it
to
yet.
general fund, sorry. So this slide wrap up the presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Thanks.
Just a quick question. working in the field, any expected increases in collaborative tuitions that we may be aware of for next year?
I mean, we have set the new
Yeah.
rates.
Yeah.
The collaboratives they sent us the new tuition rates for FY '25, and there was a slight increase, but I didn't think it was,
Yeah.
I don't remember it being significant. Did we?
I'm aware that we receive valleys. I'm not sure if the other collaboratives that we have students that attend.
I'm just thinking.
Yeah, I'm thinking,
Yeah, just
like
thinking.
5-7% maybe.
I would hope not.
Okay. Just want to make sure.
What was that giggle for? Do you have any inside
don't know.
information?
You might have some
Yeah.
inside info.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll see
Thank
what
you,
I can
Jenny.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions or comments for Jenny? Okay. Thanks. Appreciate it. I lost my agenda. Personnel update?
Pretty self-explanatory.
Yep.
The only one that might catch somebody off guard is the one that's listed on there for Betsy Hall. Will be leaving us. She's going back to the town, and so I think she's given us 16 years of service here at the school department, which we very much appreciate in the Human Resource Department, but she is returning to a payroll position with the town of Westford, so we certainly do wish her the best.
Thank you. Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor, Ming Chen?
Aye.
Chris?
Aye.
Mari?
Aye.
Catherine?
Aye.
I'm an aye. Sean?
Aye.
Bill?
Aye.
Great. Thank you, everybody.